Izuku Midoriya was born into a world that we all know to have superpowers, but these superpowers were obviously known as quirks. These superpowers became a staple in society. Many didn't know what to do if you didn't have a powerful quirk or a strong one. Many wanted to be support heroes, wanted to be heroes in general. They did not want to be police officers, doctors, and surgeons like how people in the past once wanted to be. But now, all it mattered was that you would be a hero. All people wanted to do was become one, and they'd pray every night that their children would get strong quirks, that they would be able to send them down the alleyway of being a hero. But people do not understand the treachery that would be right in front of you, the obstacles that you would have to deal with when being a hero, and Izuku Midoriya was ready for all of that. All of that would come straight for him, and in the original canon, Izuku Midoriya would be born quirkless, and he would stay that way until he was given a quirk by the number one hero, All Might himself. But what would happen if Izuku Midoriya had an RPG leveling quirk? Izuku Midoriya would immediately head to the doctors with his mother at the age of 5, and when they arrived, the doctor was in complete shock after running a couple tests. Immediately, the doctor tells his mother that he has one of the most blessed quirks that he's ever seen in his life. Inko Midoriya, his mother, is completely shocked. What does that even mean? What do you mean? And the doctor begins to explain. You see, Miss Midoriya, your son here, he has a very special type of quirk. A quirk that may be limitless, may have infinite amounts of potential. It's some sort of RPG leveling quirk, very similar to video games that me and you may have seen in the past. Maybe some that little Izuku has even played. He begins to explain more and more, and Izuku himself realizes what he's talking about, that it is somewhat similar to multiple games he has played in the past, at least like simple ones. He's never played some of the more advanced RPG-like games, but it seems as if Izuku will get his own little HUD menu, but it will also be embedded into his arm. It seems like his arm will eventually develop a small screen that would be hidden within his skin that nobody but him will be able to see. He'll be able to look at the screen and actually recognize which things are there, what stats and everything like that, in which the doctor pinches him and pokes him with a needle to get some blood and then injects him with this small little vial of some sorts, in which the mother, or Inko Midoriya, is confused at what happened, and he explains that that is how they're going to activate his quirk, and just as they do that, his little screen shows up on his arm. Izuku is shocked, or slightly startled, but also excited at the same time. Looking at the stats screen, he sees that all his stats say 0, and he doesn't even have a quest. It seems that he's going to have to actually do some relatively simple things to level up, either eventually gain more and more quests, or do miscellaneous things that would eventually allow him to gain various different amounts of leveling stats. You see, he has two different categories. His first category is the main stats. If we're talking about intelligence, if we're talking about strength, speed, stamina, stuff like that is all on that front page, but there's a separate page that he doesn't personally put stat points into. It's actually based off of different things he does. Let's say Izuku actually loves to cook, and he cooks all the time. His cooking skill will slowly but surely increase more and more and more, and it's the same thing for everything in terms of using maybe even bows, swords, anything like that. They all have different effects on Izuku, or different effects in the grand scheme of things. Even stuff like woodcutting, creating, making support items, anything you can possibly think of, he can do. Even being able to convince people of certain things, which is just involved with him being able to socialize better and better throughout his life. And Izuku seems to actually be a little bit confused by this, but his mother kind of explains that if he starts doing more chores around the house, or maybe cooks food from time to time, or learns how to cook and does that, he'll actually gain experience points from that as well, and maybe even be able to level up his other stats on top of his passive stats too, in which Izuku, hearing this, actually gives him a large incentive to do so. And in my opinion, Izuku would become far more independent in a lot quicker time. He wouldn't be as crybaby as he maybe is, of course he has that same type of personality, but it wouldn't be too heavy on that side where he's so codependent on his mother or on anybody else. When he would head back to school the next day though, he would tell everybody about his quirk, in which everyone's kind of shocked and confused as if he was like maybe some video game character. Everybody thinks it's actually kind of cool, but of course Izuku wouldn't be the most popular kid in school because, well, you can't really see leveling up. Frankly, it's like they have to just take his word for it, and it's not like they really know how strong it's gonna be. But with the idea that he would gain leveling and basically just XP in general from just doing daily tasks, it seems that Izuku is far more motivated to make sure he gets good grades, make sure to study really hard, and any help that he can do around the house and any extra things he can do in terms of working out and stuff like that would be of most importance for Izuku. He would continue on with his studying, his training, his anything he could possibly think of, and by the age of 10, he starts seeing some substantial growth. It seems like he starts getting some more experience, he starts putting stats into his leveling, and a kid like him, you probably put a decent amount into basically intelligence, maybe some into strength, and stuff like that, and kind of make it slightly well-rounded. Nonetheless, that's not the biggest and most important part of all of this. Izuku would continue on leveling and also learning more and more from his school, also from his mother, and anything that they can possibly do. His mother even realized that his cooking skills were getting to the point where all the food he made was a lot better than hers, and everything cooked a lot faster. It seemed kind of odd. It seemed so inhuman, like it was so extraordinary. But frankly, when you have people in real life that can kind of breathe fire and basically punch entirety of buildings to the ground, it's not too hard to realize that your son could be that much more gifted than some of the other kids. Nonetheless, she decides that since he's having such good growth with all this other stuff, she decides to put him into martial arts classes. It seems like this will definitely help him in hero work, but the martial arts is very basic. It's nothing too advanced to the point where he's super confused, but frankly he wouldn't be anyways. He's extremely intelligent and his stats have allowed him to learn a lot quicker, but nonetheless he'd still be a kid trying to learn something very, very complicated. Izuku would slowly but surely learn stuff like karate, taekwondo, jujitsu, but all to a lower level of degree. Everything seems to be plateauing at this point, and it all comes down to one thing, and that is actually his class. But unfortunately, Izuku will not get a choice of that class until a little bit later. It seems like he has to wait until he's basically done with middle school until he can get that class, because he needs a certain amount of experience points in the passive categories to actually get to the point. So he has almost a maxed out cooking stat, a pretty high martial arts stat, a pretty high studying stat, and everything that's all these miscellaneous stats are growing more and more. But there's still some things he hasn't really done entirely. He has an athleticism stat that isn't really too high, and that's more because, well, he just started martial arts, and also that he hasn't been big on athletics to that degree. He's not in different sports like soccer or stuff like that. So he actually decides that he'll get into that and start working out a lot more than usual. So he actually leans more into that, and his athleticism stat does slowly but surely build up and up and up. And he realizes that there are so many stats that it's hard to keep track of all of them. And he would be reaching that threshold of basically being able to choose a class based on these other stats, but unfortunately it won't be as quick as he wants it to be. And there are some interesting stats as well. Some stats that he doesn't necessarily understand. Some involve potion making and stuff like that, but he has no idea how any of that would work. Same thing with medicine. Some are technological, basically him learning technological advancements and also making support items. He's not really been into that, but sure, why not? Maybe he can read up on some gadgets he can somehow make, and eventually he'd be able to basically replicate some gadgets that were made by past support heroes, and this would just allow him to level up a little bit more in a bunch of other categories as well, being that the support category, a technological category, obviously intelligence category, a creative category, and various other things like that, because frankly there are a ton, and doing this actually allows him to interact with more and more people, because he actually creates this seemingly this gauntlet that will actually help the normal person punch twice as hard. And he's not exactly sure how he made it, but he did basically break down the process of quote unquote making it to the people that he's been showing it to, and eventually an agency would actually catch up onto this and offer him a deal to actually take it. So he gives it to him, obviously, and actually takes a good lump sum of money for it. Izuku would continue to get these interactions and having more interactions in school with people that want to learn more about his support tech and stuff like that, would allow him to level up in that category as well. Of course, let's not cross our minds that Izuku is some genius at basically interacting, and he's not really a genius at that. He's not super intelligent. This process of making this gauntlet took a long time, and the only reason why he was able to actually replicate a version of it from someone else's previously partially made gauntlet, he was actually able to make it because of, well, you know, his ultimate study stat, and being able to have that intelligence background actually allows for him to replicate things a lot easier. But if he made something from complete scratch, it would have been a lot harder. The only problem is the person that actually started making this gauntlet catches wind of what occurred and is slightly confused. It seems as if this person actually lives elsewhere, actually in America, and they're actually wondering how this random person in Japan was able to flawlessly make this support item, and relatively quickly as well. But it's a toned down version of what they wanted to do. Yes, this will help the average human, or let's say it's a person that has a quirk, but their quirk isn't strength enhancement. Yeah, it will help them, but frankly, it was for someone else and for other people as well, in terms of people that had quirks that would backfire upon themselves. And it seems like this person will be headed to Japan to speak with Izuku, because this was taken over the course of the next 3 to 4 years. Izuku now, at the age of 14 to about 15, would be slowly but surely ending his middle school year. Izuku continues on with everything he's been doing, and eventually gets to the point where he has enough statistical prowess that he can eventually choose his class. He eventually will be able to choose his class after he's actually done with his last day of middle school, which is approaching right now. Obviously, Bakugo would see him as a prime person to basically have conflict with and not want to be behind Izuku ever, but Izuku also hasn't really shown a crazy amount of hero potential, quote unquote. Support hero potential, for sure. They have seen him have high levels of intelligence, so that would make sense. So during their little spout with the teacher, how the teacher tells everybody, hey, I was gonna give you guys some applications to fill out to see what you guys wanted to do for jobs, but the teacher decides to throw those papers in the air, telling them all that he knows they want to go the hero route. And of course, everyone talks about how Bakugo and Izuku want to go to the most prestigious school in Japan, UA High School. Bakugo stands on the desk declaring that he will be the only one to get in, but Izuku just sits there and doesn't really say much at all, just shrugging his shoulders. Everybody then says that Izuku must have a good chance, and even if he can't get in as a regular hero, he'll get in as a support. And Bakugo kind of laughs at this, saying that Izuku would be a support hero and that he would be forced to anyways, because guess what? He's just, well, it's seemingly useless without being smart. And Bakugo is smart himself, but does make fun of the idea that Izuku would have to be a support hero instead. But Izuku kind of slightly stands up for himself and says that once he gets his class, that it will all be over. But everyone's kind of confused. Class? What are you talking about? Izuku explains, and the teacher obviously allows this. He's kind of in awe at the little bickering back and forth that they just had, and he explains that he actually has a class system that will be in place sooner rather than later, and he should be getting it in the next couple days. He'll be able to choose from a assortment of classes supposedly, and he'll be able to get a lot more bonuses and maybe even stuff that will allow him to be an actual or real hero, besides just a support hero that he basically is able to replicate other things at a mass. In which all of them are kind of shocked to hear. That's super cool, actually. And Bakugo is kind of annoyed by this and just rolls his eyes and just sits back in his chair. The teacher eventually calms the entire class down and tells them that it's time to head out. Izuku eventually leaving and writing in his notebook more and more about various things he could do for his next classes. What classes could he pick? He wonders. Everything is so shaded out, but it could be anything. It could be some sword class, a knight class, samurai, anything you can think of. There could be such cool ideas just sitting right in front of him. Izuku decides not to think too much about it anymore and just continues on. He continues on and heads under a bridge, but just as he does so, he begins to oddly get a feeling. A feeling of danger begins to overwhelm him as he continues to walk through. He decides to full sprint toward the exit. Being slightly faster than a normal human being, he does get to the exit just as the sludge villain becomes barreling out of a manhole cover, telling Izuku that he needs his body. "I need your body, kid, or else. Oh, I didn't know he was here. What am I supposed to do? I need to get out of here." Immediately, the sludge villain is in a complete frenzy, a panic. Izuku, seeing this, takes advantage of it and is able to basically get out of there to a certain extent. But just as he moves out of the way, it seems like this giant gust of wind blasts through the tunnel. It blasts through the tunnel, smashing into the wall and explodes the sludge villain into small little pieces. Izuku kind of creeps back and looks beyond the little wall and sees one person, a big shadow standing with his hands on his hips and his hair poking out like some weird looking figure. Immediately he realizes who it is. It's the number one hero, All Might himself. He's shocked. He begins to murmur, say all these random things, wanting All Might's autograph. All Might gives it to him and asks him if he's okay. Izuku says that he's just fine. He just realized that he should probably get out of there instead of trying to have conflict with this villain, in which All Might pats him on the head and says that he did good. But then All Might pauses.
"Wait, I know who you are. You're the person that what's his name? You just told me. Izuku Midoriya. Yes. Izuku Midoriya. You're the one that made that replica of the bracer for Hero's arms, correct?"
"Oh, yeah, I did. It was a replica that wasn't finished, but I finished it based on, well, a normal human being. It wasn't that impressive, but it definitely helped my family out, or my mother." Izuku is modest as always, and All Might says that it was extremely impressive, and he actually knows the person that originally made it. Izuku, hearing this, waves his hands really fast and it says he's sorry for using the design. He didn't know that it was illegal but he's cut off immediately, obviously. And All Might says that nobody is in legal trouble by any means, and he's just a kid. Actually, the other person that made it is a kid as well, and he's shocked to hear this. "Wait, really? A kid? Like my age?"
"Yes, she's actually 1 year older than you."
Immediately, Izuku is shocked to hear that there's someone that smart. And why does he make it sound as if she's somewhere else? All Might then continues to explain that maybe one day they will meet because it seems that she will be actually visiting Japan to join the support course at UA. Izuku is completely shocked and would love to meet this female or this woman that was the reason why he made a decent amount of money. But All Might kind of explains that the gauntlet was actually made for a bigger purpose than even Izuku intended, and that she is still in the process of making something even greater than just that simple gauntlet. And Izuku is shocked and says that he'd love to see the final product at the end of it all, and All Might says that he's sure that he will. All Might jumps off before he can run out of time, because obviously that time constraint is coming down to an end, and Izuku waves goodbye. Izuku wishes he asked a couple more questions, but unfortunately All Might was gone before he can actually realize. He heads back home, telling his mother of the entire incident, in which she is extremely worried, but it seems like Izuku is so calm. He's not actually very jittery, nothing like that at all. He's very calm, calculated, and nothing really stirred him up. It seems as if some of his stats have actually given him a different type of personality, and in fight or flight scenarios, it seems that he actually does default to having a strategic mind instead of a fearful one, which is, for one, extremely beneficial. So yeah, that's a big plus for Izuku and his kit to come. After that entire thing occurred though, Izuku realizes that he has a short amount of time. Well, quote unquote a short amount of time. He has 10 months until the UA entrance exam. The UA entrance exam is a very, very important thing that they're going to have to deal with. So he wants to begin his training the right way. He goes to his martial arts classes, gets some extra training in, and eventually what comes up is finally what he's been waiting for, and that is his class archetype, or more like his character archetype. So they all are basically just completely different in terms of ranging, but there are core versions of it. There's stuff like the fighter archetype, the rogue archetype, the ranger archetype, the barbarian archetype, and the cleric archetype. All of these are very, very different, but they all have different subcategories that will allow him to do various different things. If he wants something part of the fighter archetype, he'll have to choose between various different versions of that. And that is exactly what we'll be getting into right now. The fighter archetypes involve an arcane archer. Arcane archers use their bow proficiency to deal with devastating magical bow damage to anyone in their path. Proficiency in arcane or nature, ability, magic arrow, arcane shot, curving shot, and many, many more. Then we have some outside of an archer, which is called Battle Master. A Battle Master learns all the different ways to, well, be a Battle Master. Combat superiority, maneuvers, and different ways to enhance attacks based on their maneuvers. They know their enemy. This allows the basically person to learn an enemy or ally outside of combat. Hit points, armor class, and class level are things that Battle Masters can also see based on their own little leveling system. Obviously, regular people don't have these stat leveling things, but he will be able to see weaknesses in different armors and different things like that. Then we have the champion. Champions are all about physical excellence and devastation. This is perfect archetype for those who want to deal with raw damage. They have improved critical hits, they're remarkable athletes, and something called survivor. You are basically get an impressive addition to hit points during battle if you're basically almost a goner or on hospital's doorstep. Then we have knight, and basically a knight can more or less do an implaceable mark when an enemy is marked by you. This also gives them a disadvantage. You have hold the line. This allows the knight to slow enemies by delivering a decisive blow. Defender's Blade. This ability will enable knights to strike back with vengeance, and there's various other things that a knight would be able to do, very similar just to a knight in general. And then we have a samurai, which there are different things for samurais, different weaponry. And obviously we have the fighting spirit, which gives you an advantage on different attacks and attack rolls. And it adds actually 5 extra hit points. Then you have the more, you could call it more technical aspects, which samurai is known for their swordsmanship. So you have rapid strikes, and in certain situations you can attack a target multiple times before they can even attack you. An elegant contour, which this gives the player a massive boost in charisma and stuff like that. And that's the fighter archetype alone. And then now we can go to the rogue archetype, which has assassin, which assassins are hired killers. Those who are in death, they can basically profit off of the art. And there's a ton of different assassin things to choose from there. But unfortunately, assassin is not a choice. Sorry about that, because we did assassin last time. But you can choose the other things as well, which is inquisitive, which these rogues love to learn secrets, expose plots, and love mysteries. They have basically an eye and ear for deceit. They can basically see different or have better sight. They can tell when someone's lying and spot hidden creatures and objects. Endearing eye, which you have incredibly you're incredibly perceptive, and almost nothing can get past you. Then you have a scout, which scouts are just like natural scouting territory, living in the wilderness, survivalist specialist, superior mobility, ambush master, stuff like that. Then you have a swashbuckler, which swashbucklers are master of the blade and arts of charisma, and duelists and pirates are also swashbucklers. You have you're a master duelist, like I said. You are also given something called fancy footwork, which you can like strike and slip away from enemies with relative ease. And then we have Ranger archetypes. Ranger archetypes have about 2 different versions of the archetype, which for starters is a Beast Master, which on top of already having like light armor and bows, if you're a Beast Master, the Beast Master develops close bonds with obviously beasts, which you can have animal companionship and also a companion's bond, which will further the benefits to the beast you bond with, and more things that you would gain along the way. Then you'd have a Hunter. Hunter focuses on combat. They try to thin the hordes of the enemies from far away with bows, and you have various other abilities as a Hunter. Then you have a Barbarian, which is more or less just a Berserker class. A Berserker class doubles down on the rage and it turns it to on their foes, basically allowing them to have just brute strength and intimidating presence that would allow them to go berserk and frighten their enemies and even do double the damage in some instances. Also, we have like a frenzy version of it, like I said before, which they go kind of wild and start attacking things on a whim. And then last but not least, we have the Cleric archetype. This Cleric archetype has 2 different subsections, which first is life. So we have a life Cleric archetype, which are basically dealt with life magic to heal the sick, stuff like that. And you can have a Disciple of Life, most effective healing spells, stuff of that regard. Then you have the death version of it, which is like a Reaper archetype, and this allows the player to learn a variety of necromancy spells and inescapable destruction. Your destructive death spells are more potent, and you can actually get through enemy defenses or just, attackers or basically villain defenses a lot easier. And those are all of the ideas and archetypes that we have here. If you guys want to see exactly where I'm getting these from, these are not all mine, but whatever you guys choose will all basically involve my own ideas with it. These are just the base level of what they are. I will leave the link in the description if you want to check all of them out again, since I already explained all of them. But nonetheless, this is where Izuku's story will stop for now. Izuku Midoriya has been training harder than he ever has before. Finally, though, he's given the option. A class archetype. He begins to search through all of the archetypes, deep diving into every single last one of them until he finds one deeper within one of the categories. It's under a mix of a warrior and mage type of category, other known or classified as a combat mage, or other known as a warrior mage. He begins to do a little bit of research upon this, and he realizes that magic and this world would be intertwined relatively easily. And there is a matter of fact that he can actually learn other people's powers. But that's kind of confusing. What do you mean learn? He's not so sure, so he's going to take that to the bank. More or less just think about it for now, and more or less pick exactly what archetype he wants. Picking combat mage or warrior mage does give him a base stat total of something extremely higher than what he currently is at. So eventually he'll get extremely strong. And to start off with, he starts with his like a warrior type attack. It's more of this mage-like spell that will go surround his body in this wide aura, and he'll be able to actually fight and technically just hit things a lot harder than actually he would normally. He tries this out and he actually puts a small dent into a brick wall, which is extremely impressive at the end of the day. With a little bit more time left, we would say maybe 3 to 5 months left before the UA entrance exam, Izuku would begin his training once again, training using these powers, and he wants to learn more about this whole idea of warrior mage. Maybe this warrior mage is actually, there's more to it. He begins to actually look around and walk around the area to see if he can actually analyze or maybe even somehow learn quirks from other people, eventually stumbling across someone he knows, and that's Katsuki Bakugo, his childhood friend, quote unquote. And of course, they begin to kind of like remark at each other, and Bakugo is still kind of frustrated with the idea that Izuku could be going to UA and that he could have the potential to be, taking that first place spot from Bakugo. Nonetheless, though, Izuku doesn't really let that bother him, and he actually taps Bakugo on the shoulder, and something pops up in his HUD menu. It seems like this graphic design shows up on right in front of his face, in extending from his forearm that it was once at. He looks at it, and it reveals that he has learned Bakugo's quirk, but not to any strong extent. Bakugo could probably blast blast entire cars, maybe even half a building if he really built up sweat. But it seems like Izuku's is a little different. Since he doesn't build off of sweat, and that's not how his quirk would work, it's just a flat out explosion type of power, or explosion power like a spell of some sorts, which is extremely weak, especially because he has extremely limited mana. So with a slight argument with Bakugo, he begins training all of these powers that he currently has. He has this aura around him that can make him physically stronger, which doesn't drain too much stamina because it's based off of his own willpower and keeping it up. But Bakugo's power, or at least the hybrid version of it that Izuku has, which is extremely weak at this moment, he has it to the point where it's basically draining a ton of stamina by just making a semi-big blast. The blast is probably as big as maybe a basketball, and it drains almost half of his stamina from doing it, or his mana from doing it only one time. So he realizes that using it in a very passive way would be the best way to train it, but overall training and trying to get some of these quests that he currently has under his belt, leveling up and stuff like that, would be the best approach for the UA entrance exam. But Izuku himself knows his limitations. He's not extremely strong, but by all means he's not extremely weak. Izuku continues on with his training more and more, trying to basically get as strong as possible using this new power or class archetype that he has. Figuring out that a warrior mage can actually do various things. He can actually use his aura to fly, but just as he starts doing that, he begins crashing down into the park because he realizes how much mana it actually drains. He actually starts building up more mana every time he levels up, but obviously leveling up is harder or easier said than done, and doing all this other stuff, it does help with his mana, but it's all passive. Some other types of activities could up his mana yield, but it might be from every other level or every 3 or 4 levels of that category. But nonetheless, Izuku does grind as much as possible, like he's playing some video game, and eventually is ready for the UA entrance exam. Izuku throughout this time obviously has been studying and doing his normal training, and now that he's ready, he'll tell his mother, and they'll be off to basically see if he can be a future hero. Izuku would go off with his mother to the UA entrance exam, get dropped off, and she would wish him good luck. He'd walk in, and he'd look around. He'd realize that he was obviously there early, but there's so many people that are going to be sitting in these seats, so many people that are going to compete with him. He keeps looking around, and he goes to back up, but he runs into somebody and actually makes her fall to the ground. He immediately grabs her by the hand and flings her back up, but she kind of like leans into him. He's apologizes immediately, saying that he's super sorry, but she actually smiles and points at him, saying that she knows who he is. You know who I am? What is that even supposed to mean? She explains who she is, that she is Melissa Shield, and that she's actually here to watch the contestants. She's in the support course already based on a special request, and that she just wanted to watch out for some of these other heroes. Izuku is shocked and says that it's a pleasure in his own little awkward way, in which she slightly laughs at. Izuku is happy to basically meet her acquaintance, especially after kind of in a way copying her design, in which she says that actually accelerated her process in terms of making what is known as her half gauntlet to full gauntlet type of machine that she actually wanted to work on throughout these years. And Izuku kind of just shakes his hands rapidly, saying that he really didn't do anything. And Melissa just smiles and then just heads up to the watch area for where all the teachers and other pro heroes are currently at. Izuku, now basically in a completely awkward state, is a little jumpy around people, and especially around someone that walks in by the name of Bakugo. Bakugo kind of is right next to him and calls him a nerd, telling him to focus up and go sit down. That beating Izuku at his absolute worst is not something that he wants. He walks over to the seating and they both sit down next to each other because, well, that's where they have been assigned. They wait for the announcements to begin, and that's when President Mike arrives, explaining everything that's going to happen. Starting with the written portion of the UA entrance exam, all of them kind of head off into different rooms, finishing up that exam. Izuku has a pretty easy time in terms of doing it. He's pretty smart at that, and frankly, he's probably the smartest in his class next to Bakugo, so if we're speaking about intelligence, he's probably as smart, maybe even a little bit smarter than Bakugo, depending on the way you look at it. Izuku would then head back, wait in his seats, and President Mike would greet the entirety of all of the quote-unquote future pro heroes back in. President Mike begins to explain that there is going to be a practical exam, but as Izuku is listening, he realizes how not practical this exam is. They're going to be fighting robots. What's the point of fighting robots? That doesn't really make sense to him. Nonetheless, he just continues to listen on. He then decides that he's going to actually look at everybody else's quirks, per se. Yes, he's been writing down a ton of stuff in terms of just learning about other people's quirks, but on the other hand, he kind of needs to figure out each one of their quirks, just like maybe deciding in terms of, learning it in a way. Like I said before, his quirk, or his basically RPG leveling quirk in terms of the warrior mage archetype, is more or less based off of and framed around the idea that he can actually quote-unquote copy a quirk, but it starts from the very, very, very lowest level, basically leading to him having to learn the quirk. So he does look around, sees some people, and sees that there are some interesting people. And he does spot one boy that has some blue hair, and his name is Tenya Ida. He stands up and basically corrects President Mike when he didn't need to be corrected, and he looks at Tenya Ida in a kind of an odd way as he realizes that he has some sort of an engine quirk. Izuku gets kind of curious at this and actually kind of learns the engine quirk, but when he puts it within his stat sheet, it seems that it doesn't form his body at all. It's just made to make him faster. He's not sure how that works, but it does seem like when he activates it, it does make him quicker, but his stamina drains like crazy and he becomes relatively fatigued, at least in his little test run on his basically techno type of little screen that he has for his video game screen, quote unquote. Nonetheless though, Izuku gets through that little lecture that they have to deal with and heads out to the gates. Him and Bakugo are separated, and all the teachers wait in complete, basically, astonishment at watching not only some of these top students that they've heard about, but also Izuku Midoriya, the boy that was basically on path to being a support hero. Yes, he just used his intelligence to kind of figure out some things in terms of being that technological guy, but that was never his goal at the end of the day. Of course, he probably could do some good work in a support course, but he had no intention of being a support hero. Izuku wants to be on the front lines, wants to protect everybody and make sure everyone is safe. So when that practical exam starts, all the heroes wait and stare at Izuku while he begins flying through, smashing into robot after robot after robot. He's been upgrading his stamina and his flying is slightly better, but of course he can't really go very high, especially with a large risk to actually, plummeting to the ground and kind of dying. So he keeps it low and just kind of gives it a hover and basically allows himself to fly a decent faster than he would if he was just running. So he begins just smashing through the robots, and the three-pointer robot is a little bit of an issue. Izuku himself actually finds a little bit of an issue smashing through the three-point robot just because it is slightly more strong. He begins to think that maybe there's more to this. Maybe there's more that he can use to be even stronger. He's not so sure. He hasn't really tried or thought out the box that far, but nonetheless, maybe he can somehow intertwine one of these learning quirks, or a quirk that he learned, to his aura that he already surrounds himself in. That power aura that gives him, he's assuming a 2 to 3 times multiplier, at least based on the stat sheet, and basically it's all in just strength and speed. Maybe if he adds the explosion quirk or the speed quirk, it might allow him to go faster or be hit stronger, actually fight harder in general. He begins to think about this, but those thoughts are kind of thrown to the back right when he hears these rumbling of footsteps crashing into the scene. The zero pointer has been unleashed, and the zero pointer is running rampant in front of all of them. It seems as if the zero pointer is going to smash into everything, and everyone begins to run. That's until Izuku hears a small voice, a voice that he just heard in the near distance. It seems like another girl, or a girl, a future hero, is stuck under the rubble. He begins to run over, peeling off the rubble as quick as possible, trying to get her out. And he realizes that this is going to be a lot more difficult than he believed. The other robot, the giant robot, is getting closer and closer. So he decides something. He's going to hopefully be able to protect her with his aura. He begins to kind of stand over her, and she wonders what he's doing. She says that he needs to get out of the way, that he will get crushed as well. But Izuku shakes his head and tells her not to worry. Immediately the aura begins to surround both of them, and Izuku's mana begins to plummet all the way from a score of 10,000 all the way down to 100. It's plummeting at a rapid rate, and eventually he's almost out. But it seems like he realized something, that he doesn't need to combine these two powers. He just needs to amplify the one that is basically the easiest to use in terms of a passive. He begins to amplify his aura 3 times, 4, 5, 6, 10, 20. Out of nowhere, he's that much stronger, but the thing is, he only got to that strength because he tanked his mana entirely. And it wouldn't matter how much his mana he actually has, it would still plummet at a rapid rate. It's just the matter of fact that he doesn't know how to efficiently use it. He begins to protect the girl with the aura, and since he's surrounding 2 people, it is actually straining his body a lot more. The foot then comes crashing down on top of him, and it looks like both of them are squished, like flattened, like pancakes. But the thing is, they're not. The aura begins to spark up and immediately begins to tread through the electronics of the giant robot, electrifying the robot like crazy, forcing it to fall over, and it just blows up at the chest all the way down to its feet. Izuku is on his last legs. He helps the girl up and kind of drags her to Recovery Girl. Izuku collapses and he's basically gasping for air, trying to basically recover as much as possible. His stamina and his mana begins to climb once again, but at the end of the day, it takes stamina to climb your mana, so he's limited like crazy. Izuku passes out. He's out cold. He's lost too much stamina, and frankly his mana is so low that it basically put him in a state of you have to go to sleep or else. Izuku luckily is able to recover, and eventually he'd wake up 3 days later. He's concerned about what happened. He doesn't really remember that much, just specs. He's hoping that he did enough to actually get into UA. His mother says that she's sure that he did, and that he did something better than they would have ever asked for. He saved somebody, and that's why he was basically out of commission for a while. But they said that it was really nothing to worry about. It was just a backlash from his quirk. That his quirk was basically drained of stamina and mana entirely, so that he had to get an extreme amount of rest. 3 days would pass, even to a week. They're waiting for the letter to finally arrive, and that letter finally did. And that letter would have All Might himself. All Might himself would stand tall and look at Izuku, or at least through the hologram, and tell him that he got into UA, Class 1A specifically, and that not only that he was the #1 student going in. And Izuku is shocked. The #1 student in the UA entrance exam? How was I able to do that? Izuku is completely astonished, but he didn't realize that yes, he might have gotten maybe mid to like lower high end of the pack in terms of how many robots he destroyed, but he also got hero points for saving that girl and doing it in a relatively really good full fashion. Izuku didn't realize this at the time. He just didn't even think about it. He just wanted to save the girl. He doesn't even know the girl's name, but nonetheless, he hopes that she's in good standings and hopefully she eventually will get into UA as well. Nonetheless though, Izuku's not really thinking much of that. He's just excited. After a little bit of celebrating and after some time of rest and ready to go to UA for the first time, Izuku gets taken to UA. He walks in and he looks around for a little bit, obviously getting there early because you better be early or you're late. Izuku looks around and just is in complete awe. Eventually though, All Might would come out of nowhere, surprising Izuku, and All Might asks him to come to his office. Izuku does just that, and obviously complying. All Might is his favorite hero, and when he walks in, he sees the same girl that he met, or at least caught from falling, and which it was kind of his fault, but nonetheless, he sees that same girl, Malicious Shields. And they introduce each other once again, and All Might explains something to him. That Melissa, she's quirkless, but actually she wanted to become an actual hero. She was envious of the idea that she couldn't do it, but something came up and allowed her to do just that. She's going to be a support hero student, but she also wants to be a hero student in either Class 1A or Class 1B, and All Might basically keeps all the information to a minimum. Izuku can tell that straight up, but he doesn't question the pro hero and his favorite hero. And he asks, what does that mean for him? What is needed? All Might then reveals that obviously Izuku is the #1 student coming out of the entrance exam, and he would like for him to keep an eye on Melissa if she decides to go to Class 1A. Eventually, she would agree to go to Class 1A because she does know Izuku and is pretty fond of him in terms of what he was able to create based off of her very, very minimal designs. And obviously, Izuku would be completely fine with this. He doesn't mind watching over her and making sure that she's good. And All Might says that they should begin training sooner rather than later. Izuku has arguably one of the more powerful quirks, and on top of that, he has such great control over it, and he's learning so much about it on his own. And then Melissa needs someone like that to actually help her out learn a quirk that she developed when she was, this late of a bloomer. Izuku looks at All Might and looks at Melissa and kind of smiles and says that he can handle it, but the whole late bloomer stuff, should he tell everyone else that, or should he make something up better than that? And All Might is kind of shocked. You realize that I know about the whole, she's not a late bloomer. She either had a quirk before and, didn't show it off because it was either weak, or they all seemed that it was non-consequential, or she got a quirk. How would she get a quirk? I don't know. But, I can make my theories if you'd like. All Might is kind of shocked. He was able to deduce all of this very quickly, and Izuku would be the person to do that. Frankly, he's extremely smart, and all of his stats have done this, and he's also has a leveling system for practically everything. If we're talking about support hero stuff, he has that. We're talking about reading, he has that. We're talking about math, he has that. So cooking, sure. Cleaning, sure. It's just part of his RPG leveling system. It's just straight up everything you can think of is there. Izuku is basically just quickly explaining to All Might how he deduced this, and All Might apologizes for trying to jump around the truth. Izuku waves his hands off and basically says that it's completely fine, that he understands. But nonetheless, he'll be making sure that Melissa is just fine and dandy, and they'll be able to train together whenever they can, or foreseeably possible. And All Might's happy to hear this, and he sends off Izuku, and would send off Melissa as well to meet at the Class 1A classroom first, and then after she's done with the Class 1A hero work, she'd go to the support course. Obviously, Melissa is extremely smart, and we can make assumptions that she's probably, in terms of intelligence, far beyond what UA has already qualified for. Izuku actually asked about this, and she says that her general studies are practically already over, and she's already in 3rd year general studies, so she doesn't necessarily need to worry about Gen Ed right at this moment. Izuku is shocked and says that he wished he could do something like that, and Melissa regards that he probably could, but he just wasn't given the option to do so. And he kind of just shrugs, and eventually they'd end up in class. Bakugo is obviously there yelling at the blue-haired boy by the name of Tenya Ida, and they make the entirety of that whole scene once again. Aizawa would eventually walk in, telling everybody to shut their mouths because they're just annoying brats, and tell them that there is no little ceremony that they'll be going to, that they'll be having a test. Izuku kind of assumed this. You're at a hero school, why wouldn't there be a test off the bats? But Izuku did not expect one thing. After he got up to the plate, launching the ball as far as possible, which ended up only going maybe 400 meters. It's good. It's really good, but it's not going to be as good as what Bakugo could do. And Aizawa asks if that was 100% his best. Izuku kind of explains that there's limitations to what he can do. He could theoretically throw it extremely far, but he'd be drained out of stamina, mana, and he wouldn't be able to recover it, so he'd be out of commission for all the rest of their tests. Aizawa hears this and kind of smiles and says that he's a smart kid. He's heard the rumors about him, and it's definitely true. Izuku nods and walks to the line, and everybody just is excited. Oh, we want to throw the ball, like we want to do this, we want to do that. And Aizawa gets kind of mad, and Izuku looks at Aizawa and realizes what he's going to do, telling all of them that if they don't do their best, or whoever gets last place will be expelled from UA. Izuku, hearing this, thinks that he's pretty serious. It kind of seems that way, but at the same time it's weird to think about because it seems that Aizawa has a whole new method to it. But just as they're basically going through all these tests, Bakugo would eventually get out of hand and Aizawa would reveal his quirk. Izuku, being extremely interested in it, he decides that he's going to learn this quirk, and that would actually be his last quirk he can learn until he gets a little bit stronger. By a little bit, I mean a couple, like maybe 10 levels, 15 levels, because he only has 3 slots. So he has a speed quirk, theoretically, or technically, and then he has Bakugo's quirk, which is an explosion quirk, which is a little bit different, because it's kind of like a mimic than anything. And then Aizawa's quirk, which is kind of a mimic in itself as well, so it would work slightly differently. He tries to activate the quirk, and his eyes kind of flicker for a second, but that's about it. Aizawa, seeing this, asks him what he just did, and he said that he learned his quirk, but the base level of his quirk is so little that he can't really do much with it at this moment. Aizawa is shocked and is basically taking favorites with Izuku. Let's be honest, Izuku is the only one so far that has shown that he wants to learn more or does more than just, oh, well, I have a quirk, so I'm going to be strong. Izuku has been that this entire time, trying to figure out how strong he could be. Nonetheless, all of the little, practice stuff and all of the testing goes by relatively easily. Izuku actually gets second place in this regard, and he actually gets one behind Bakugo, which Bakugo is basically kind of more or less flexing on him, saying that he's the best and he's better than him and better than all these other people. But Izuku says that, getting one quirk assessment test better than him doesn't make up for the entirety of the entrance exam. And Bakugo gets kind of mad about this, and he goes blasting at Izuku, ready to land a hit, but Izuku just slips out of the way, tripping him, and everybody kind of laughs at Bakugo. Aizawa didn't even stop it, knowing that Izuku would be able to handle it, and he tells everybody to head back to the classroom and they'll be finishing up relatively soon. The day ends relatively easy. The quirk assessment test was over, and Aizawa does reveal that there's nobody that's going to get expelled. He does see potential in this entire class, and since everybody is trying, he wants to at least keep the person that did fail, which is Hagakure. And he also feels kind of bad because she's just an invisible girl. She's kind of limited, but she's good for other things, So, like good stealth and stuff, but it's just a big thing that he would see in terms of like potential versus reality of how well they're doing right now. Izuku obviously would have his little chat with Melissa and ask if she wanted to train, but she obviously would have to head off to the support course and also handle some other business, but they do exchange numbers and plan to train together very soon. But they're going to be paired up relatively easily, or they're going to be paired up relatively frequently because, for one, All Might is All Might and he wants that to happen, but nonetheless, Izuku and Melissa would make a good partner in terms of hero work. And obviously they're both extremely smart, but Melissa does lean more into the support idea of it, and Izuku knows how to look at things that are minimalistic and create things that will make stuff or make regular people a lot stronger. Izuku has done that before, and he could do it again, even though his main focus is not a support role. Well, nonetheless, the next day, they'd be able to show how strong together they truly are. And when they arrive At UA again, it's announced that they are going to be doing a little bit of hero training. That hero training will involve All Might himself.
I am here, walking through the door like a normal person.
All Might comes busting through the door, and obviously he says his signature line, I am here. All Might would then explain to them that they're going to get on their hero suits and then start up their training. Izuku has a similar suit that he would in canon, but let's just say it's a little more retro, a little more like fancy than the one that he would have had normally, because his mother obviously made it with the budget that she had, but now the budget was a little bit higher, so definitely looks a lot better, and it's more suited for his aura type attacks and more durable in that regard, so his clothing won't get completely and utterly obliterated by his quirk, so that's definitely a win. They would head out to All Might, and All Might would explain that they'll be doing heroes versus villains. And this would be relatively simple. 2 versus 2, villains will be protecting a bomb, and basically if they all get captured or obviously defeated, or the hero team touches the bomb, the villains lose. If the hero team runs out of time, or they both get captured and they can't touch the bomb obviously in the lengthy time that they're given, they lose. Relatively simple, and the teams are already built up. The first team is the villains, and that is Katsuki Bakugo and Ochako Uraraka, the girl that actually Izuku saved. He didn't even realize this, and I guess she didn't see him, but they have that little like handshake and that thanks for helping her, obviously, but she didn't even realize that Izuku was the same person. It was so basically mythical in a way. His aura overwhelmed both of them to the point where they didn't even know who each other were at that moment, and frankly Izuku was just doing it on a whim. And the hero team, though, going against them would be Izuku himself and Melissa Shields. So that fight will then commence once Bakugo and Ochako were in the building ready to defend the bomb. The heroes would have 5 minutes to make their plan, and a plan they definitely did. Melissa would come up with a strategy for the attack on the building, taking different directions and using some of the gadgets that she's made to make sounds and noises in other areas to distract them relatively easily. All Might would give their countdown and tell them that they can begin in 3,
2, 1, begin.
The heroes versus villains exercise is about to begin. Bakugo and Ochako Uraraka versus Izuku Midoriya and Melissa Shields. This fight will be, well, a bit lopsided, you could say. 2 extremely smart people and 1 person that is going to lean into his own strengths pretty heavily. Bakugo wants a fight with Izuku. Will Izuku give him that fight? Well, knowing him, he most likely won't. Izuku is not the type of person to want to just straight up brawl with somebody. Melissa and Izuku would approach the building with mostly just strategy. They want to do everything in their power to distract Bakugo himself and Ochako if need be, but the distraction would go relatively flawlessly. The sounds would begin making noise up the staircase, and as Bakugo begins exploding down that said staircase, he sees nothing. There's nobody there at all. Izuku and Melissa begin to work their way up as an enraged Bakugo begins blasting through hallway after hallway. They can blatantly hear him. There is no sneaking around with Bakugo. He's just flying in and out of rooms as quick as possible. Eventually, they are able to spot where the bomb is, and they see that Ochako is currently waiting exactly right there. They both approach her and go in basically to get to touch the bomb. But just as Melissa is about to more or less strike Ochako, it seems that the bracer that she's currently wearing that limits her quirk malfunctions. It actually glitches out, and her arm punches a hole right through the floor, and that hole itself gives Bakugo a chance to blast upwards. He blasts up, and now it's a clear 2v2, and Bakugo blasts Melissa into the wall as Izuku stands in front of Bakugo, in front of the boy, or the student that wants so badly to make sure that he will be number 1. Izuku wanted to avoid a fight, but it seems like Bakugo has forced his hand, and that fight will definitely commence. Immediately, Bakugo and Ochako Uraraka go to attack Izuku, but just as they do that, it seems that Izuku knows every single move Bakugo has in mind. His large right overhand that comes right past Izuku's shoulder is immediately grabbed and he's slammed into the ground. Izuku finds this opening and kicks him so hard that he goes through the floor beneath them. He immediately tries to react to Ochako, going to block her attack, but the only thing is, he doesn't know Ochako like he knows Bakugo. He immediately gets touched on the arm as his arm begins to float in the air. He follows that arm right up to the sky, or at least to the roof, and he realizes what her quirk is: zero gravity. This may be an issue. So he decides to use Bakugo's quirk against him, or at least his explosive power based around his warrior mage skill that is dealt around his idea of a copycat. He begins to basically copy the quirk once again, and he begins to blast around using the zero gravity to his advantage. He immediately blasts toward Ochako, aiming an explosion at her face, but instead of actually shooting her with the explosion, he shoots right beside her head and spins out. When he spins out, he immediately grabs and hugs onto the bomb as he crashes out the window, and he carries the bomb out with him. He begins to float to the sky and hopes that hopefully someone would get him out. Luckily, Ochako is able to help him out and get him back into the window, but of course All Might on the intercoms announces that the hero team has won. Immediately, Izuku basically thanks them for the fight and grabs Melissa and jumps off, basically to get her some healing from Recovery Girl. As they head over, he can hear the screams of Bakugo and the fact that he is extremely pissed off at what just occurred. He heads out and is allowed to sit with Melissa as she gets healed by Recovery Girl. Eventually, Melissa would wake up and she's kind of shocked at what occurred, but then realized what actually happened. She looks at Izuku and apologizes for what occurred, but Izuku shakes his head and says it's fine. He doesn't really mind in that regard, but does say that she can't lean on her technology so heavily. Of course, Melissa knows that. She's extremely smart herself and realizes her faults in terms of what just occurred, and she's kind of frustrated with herself. She let herself down, let All Might down, let her partner down. What is she supposed to think? Izuku tells her that it's just fine, that mistakes are going to happen. He's made plenty of them. But at the end of the day, you gotta correct them. And he begins to say that it's time for them to correct them. And of course, the way of correcting it is literally training. He believes that so wholeheartedly, and even All Might believe that as well. This leads them, after classes, to head over to Dagobah Beach after Melissa is a little bit more rested from getting healed up. She was pretty hurt. She wasn't extremely with broken arms and stuff, but she was hurt. So eventually she's basically good to go, and they're at Dagobah Beach talking about her quirk and what to do. But Melissa feels that getting an idea of what Izuku's quirk does might give her some ideas with One for All. So he explains it entirely. He explains that it's an RPG leveling quirk, that it's all based off of statistics and stats that he can raise, and that leveling up becomes increasingly harder as the levels go on. But there's also levels within the other levels. He tries to explain it and says there's levels literally for cooking, cleaning, running, walking, anything you can think of. There's levels, and there's a skill graph for that. She kind of laughs at this, thinking it's kind of a joke, but he says that it's literally not, that he has a cooking skill and he's been cooking kind of all his life so that he can upgrade this cooking skill. She says that if that makes his cooking even better, then he definitely needs to make her something one day. Maybe they can have dinner. And Izuku, in his awkward self, awkwardly laughs and tries to murmur his way out of it, and eventually says that he will totally do that. But of course he's stammering and being all awkward, just like the Izuku we all know. But of course Melissa just laughs this off in her own way, and eventually All Might would arrive. He would know that they'd probably be training out here, of course, after the little display that occurred, and All Might tells her that it's just fine, that she has to figure out her own way, and she's always done that all her life, so it shouldn't be too difficult. Just as they say this though, Melissa realizes something, her own way. Maybe she's been using One For All wrong. She realizes that One For All, well, is extremely powerful, but if put in singular limbs, it more or less destroys your body, and she's seen that, and that's why she had a limiter on her arm, so that she can use One For All at a certain rate without actually kind of making that rate personally using that rate herself. But what if she puts it throughout her whole body? Immediately, she realizes the revelation she just has and tries to do just that. She activates One For All at literally 3% and tries to move around. Of course, this becomes a struggle. One For All keeps petering in and out, and she's trying her hardest to not activate it at 100%, because if she takes a step at 100%, she's pretty sure she'll shatter her leg. But it's still a great idea. Izuku even commends her for this and is kind of shocked that he didn't think of this sooner, but nonetheless, they came up with it. The next couple days, they'd be training more and more with One For All at this lower percentage, and she'd get a grip on it. It's more or less getting it to a 3% to 5% of One For All and being able to move around relatively freely. Of course, the sparring with Izuku will definitely help. But after that 3-day gap, eventually their hero training would begin once again, and it would actually be involved with rescue training. Something that Izuku is pretty excited about. In fact, he is basically on the idea that he wants to save everybody, and if he can, that would be amazing. So this rescue training should help him do that. Aizawa speaks to the entirety of the class and then lets them all head off to the buses. As the buses head over, Izuku begins to see multiple notifications come up from his HUD menu. Just as they do, he realizes what they're saying. 0 out of 5 villains defeated? 0 out of 10? What does that even mean? Oh, maybe there's decoy villains? Like robots? Izuku kind of shrugs. Of course, he's not really thinking too much about it, but when he does arrive, he gets some weird ominous feeling. Just as Pro Hero 13 walks out and greets all of them. He begins to walk over to Aizawa and tugs on his arm and basically tells him exactly what he's seeing in his HUD menu. Aizawa then is confused. He begins to ask questions, ask about what Izuku is even talking about, but eventually what he is talking about is revealed, and that's revealed to be a ton of villains. Villains begin to emerge like crazy, begin to spiral out of control. Shigaraki, Nomu, and also Kurogiri begin to emerge out of portals, or more like Kurogiri is the portal. But nonetheless, they begin to siege on the future pro heroes. Of course, Aizawa steps in front and begins to fight off these villains, Izuku watching as Aizawa turns on and off his quirk in a complete spectacle. Izuku watches closely, very closely, because he knows how strong this quirk could possibly be. But just as he's watching, a warp gate appears in front of him and many others, and he's basically warped out of there in a matter of seconds. He drops in the water below, but he swims up immediately and begins to use his kind of like speed / accelerator magic, you could call it, but it's just a copy of a speed like quirk, and begins to head over to a nearby boat, jumping up on top of the boat as he basically shakes off the water. He looks at 2 people are already there. It seems that Mineta and also Tsuyu are right in front of him. Tsuyu says that she was actually going to go get him, but it seems that he's able to handle it himself relatively easily. He thanks her for the thoughts, but then does say that they're gonna need to get out of here, that he's not sure exactly what to do, but maybe something would possibly occur. She asks if he can maybe blast them out of here. Of course, she knows that he has something similar to Bakugo's power, being able to blast off or basically use explosions to move at quicker speeds, but he says that's really not possible. Unfortunately, he was only able to do that, or at least effectively, because he was under 0 gravity. It just wouldn't be possible in this regard unless he wanted to tire himself out and release all his mana at once. Tsuyu understands, but Mineta immediately questions how they could be so calm with all of these villains around them. Izuku looks around to see a ton of them, all in the water, and he begins to try and think, wow, what's gonna happen? What is he gonna do? But then he does think of something. He realizes something. maybe, just maybe, he can make a strong enough impact to more or less suck them into a kind of like a tidal wave in a way. He thinks and he realizes that he definitely can, but this is going to drain at least half of his mana and destroy his stamina. He's going to be exhausted, he's going to need time to recover for a little bit, and he begins to explain the plan. Look, what most of you guys are seeing and what you have seen is about 2 to 3 times my power. I know that might sound weird, but it's a statistical breakdown that I have currently. I can use this strength enhancement using basically magic, which Mineta kind of is weird about and begins to ask if he's some sort of mage. Sort of, I guess, but a warrior mage is kind of what I go by. But that's not the problem here. Listen, I can ramp up that power a lot, and I can send a shockwave to the ground. But there's one big problem with that. It's gonna put me out. I'm gonna be exhausted, and my mana is going to at least be halfway down. Suyu immediately questions, "Mana? What are you talking about, mana?" That's a story for another day. Look, it's just part of my quirk. If you want to know more about it, we can talk about it later. Azuku immediately tells them if they're ready, and they shrug and say, yeah, they are. Azuku powers up and his aura flares like crazy. He looks down as he jumps off the ship and just barrels his fist downward. As he does this, his body follows, and electricity surges around him. It seems that he's picking up friction through the air itself. It's kind of odd. He wouldn't think that this much power would do that, but it seems like it's channeling something different, and the friction from everything around it is catching up. It seems like it's a combination of his just basically base multiplier and also his speed like magic. Doing this allows him to pick up a ton of friction, and electricity surges as he strikes into the water, and it becomes slightly electrified. Mineta immediately starts throwing his sticky balls into the water as a whirlpool opens up, as a bunch of stunned and stuck monsters and creatures or villains begin to get sucked in the tidal pool. Azuku begins to fall closer and closer into the water as Suyu grabs him, pulls him away as her tongue gets slightly shocked, but she's okay. It's kind of just like if you got a little static shock from poking somebody after rubbing your feet on the carpet. They immediately are back on the shore, and he tells all of them to get down for now. Aizawa can handle what's going on up there, at least in the meantime. They're just getting some rest. While they're doing this, though, they realize that Aizawa, can't really handle what's going on. It seems as if Aizawa is slowly but surely being whittled down. This is made extremely apparent when Aizawa is attacked by the Nomu. Azuku watches on as the Nomu begins to charge forward, and he begins to find a small bit of strength within himself. He activates his power, his base multiplier, to a certain extent of about 7x. Once he does this, he tackles into the side of the Nomu, pushing him toward the other side of the USJ, or at least the wall nearby. He immediately backs off and grabs Aizawa, jumping off, throwing him into the air as Suyu jumps after him, grabbing him with his tongue, or with her tongue, and jumping toward the staircase. Azuku is now in front of the Nomu and is debating with what he should do. Just as he stares at the Nomu, though, his HUD menu begins to flare up, realizing that the Nomu itself is something different. The Nomu itself is human. Azuku is shocked to see this, and he realizes what he can do. His HUD menu is literally telling him exactly what he can do. But just as he begins to contemplate this, a whisper comes in his ear. "The plan is this, Azuku Midoriya. It's time to disassemble the Nomu." Azuku freaks out for a second and whispers in his own voice about what the hell's going on. Immediately, the disembodied voice begins to explain that they are part of his quirk. It seems that he has more than what he actually believed, but he begins to just get relayed information about how to disassemble it, and hearing everything that's going to happen, Azuku knows what's ahead of him. The Nomu comes charging in, and Azuku needs pure and utter focus to actually focus on the Nomu, and he just tries to defend himself. As he does this though, it seems like the villains want him dead as quick as possible, and they're actually looking for All Might himself, so maybe this would draw him out. But just as Shigaraki is about to grab Izuku's arm, Aizawa himself activates his quirk as Melissa kicks him right in the face, sending him toward a small pond. Melissa jumps out of the way just as they hear the ground shake from above, and guess who is here?
I am here.
All Might has arrived. All Might has now entered the USJ and charges at the Nomu, punching him square in the jaw. Izuku is able to stagger back, and he stares at All Might and tells him exactly what he found out. That this is a human, we cannot kill it and it will not die. Frankly, this thing is almost unkillable. But in a matter of sense, he should be able to disassemble it because it's all built of quirks. And it seems that he can reverse his power. Yes, he has a strength multiplier, but he can actually invert that, not make himself weaker, but make something else weaker. And quirks are a matter of genetics. He should be able to break them down, according to his disembodied voice. All Might looks at him weird and begins to think that Izuku probably shouldn't be listening to voices in his head because that's a little crazy, but he'll trust the kid. The All Might and Nomu fight begins as Izuku begins to focus as much as possible. Shigaraki has no idea what's going on, and nor does Kurogiri. He begins to focus on the Nomu, and he begins his charge up. Izuku focuses more and more as All Might begins to lose ground against the Nomu, and Shigaraki begins to laugh at their little trump card, that it's taking too long. But luckily they're able to protect Izuku just long enough for All Might to back away and everybody clear out as a wave of energy gets dispersed toward the Nomu, and actually some gets dispersed toward Kurogiri. And this immediately reveals that the Nomu is a person. The quartz begin to break down and evaporate into thin air. It seems like Izuku can somehow delete them in his own way, but it drained him like hell. All his mana was basically drained from eliminating the quirks of the Nomu, but it also hit Kurogiri. What does that even mean? Izuku collapses to the ground, and he looks up to see the Nomu completely back in his human form, but he looks to see Aizawa's face drop in horror as a glimpse of Aizawa's old friend shows in the Kurogiri's face. He's now revealed something to Aizawa and many others that is a horrifying sight. They just saw someone that used to be a UA student that died right in front of them, but somehow he's still alive. Izuku passes out from his overusage of mana and obviously overusage of stamina, and then wakes up days later with the announcement of the sports festival. Izuku begins to ask what's going on and what happened before he passed out. He barely remembers anything, but the recovery girl says that he's actually fine. His body recovers far quicker than anybody she's ever seen, and it's all based on his quirk. It's really impressive. Izuku thanks her, sort of, but she's kind of dodging the question. Izuku is helped up and is told that he'll be able to participate in the UA Sports Festival, but she hopes that he'll be able to do at full capacity. Frankly, he is a little short in terms of his stamina, and he did basically use a massive trump card that he didn't even know how to use at the time. Izuku nods and says that he'll be ready, and he asks when it's going to be, and she says it's only from a day. It's only a day from now, so basically it's tomorrow. And Izuku heads off, eventually opening the door as Melissa and All Might stand right there. Melissa hugs him and thanks a god or whatever god, and is happy that Izuku is alive. They head off and he talks to All Might. All Might questions how he did what he did and explains exactly what occurred and what the Warp Gate person, the villain, was. And Izuku, hearing this, is completely shocked and says that if they can get him back, he should be able to revert him. But All Might shuts him down and says that it's not that simple. finding them is practically impossible, and now they know that Izuku can do something like that. They're not going to put him in that situation again, especially knowing the connection he has to UA. All Might is making a lot of sense here, and Izuku agrees, and obviously Aizawa is in a state of sorrow. Of course he didn't see it, none of us see it. Aizawa is that person to hide and bury his feelings down under, but nonetheless Izuku, the day of the UA Sports Festival, walks up to him and apologizes. But Aizawa's confused. Why is he apologizing? Frankly, Izuku should be praised. Izuku helped everybody, made it so everybody was safe. No one even got hurt. And he says he's sorry that he didn't have enough power to revert his friend. If he did, if he had enough stamina or mana, or if he didn't focus on the Nomu entirely and just left him a half Nomu and gave him partial quirks, maybe he could have cured his friend. But Aizawa shakes his head and tells the kid that you can't save everybody. Heroes save who they can, and basically they have to live with what comes after. Izuku, it's hard for him to hear this. He doesn't like the idea that he can't save everybody. At the end of the day, it's true. Saving everybody is metrically impossible. You can't do that. Even All Might can't save everybody. There's people out of reach, and there always will be. Izuku, hearing this, is reassured at this whole line of hero work. Reassured that he wants to be the strongest he possibly can, and now he's ready for the UA Sports Festival, even if he can't use his entirety of his power. The first event is announced, and Izuku is obviously the person to come give a speech. He gives his little speech. As awkward as Izuku is, he's a little better and a little more confident, but still has that awkwardness to him. He begins to explain that he's basically gone through a wild ride so far with the people here, and that he wouldn't want to go through it with anybody else, and they're here to entertain and make everybody enjoy this event. Everyone cheers, and everyone's talking about how amazing Izuku is, and Bakugo has a score to settle. Izuku walks back down and gets ready for the first event as Midnight spins a wheel. As the wheel spins, something comes up. And when that comes up, it's the first event. And that event is a obstacle course race. A race to the very end. Midnight says that a wheel will be spun every single time that obviously these races and stuff happen, and begins to count them all down and says that it's their turn to show why they're going to be future heroes. And she begins her countdown. 3, 2, 1, go. The very first event in the UA Sports Festival was the obstacle course race. And once it began, and obviously once Midnight gave her little countdown, Izuku Midoriya would go sprinting off in front of the entirety of the crowd, using his more like copycat magic and using his speed like Quirk. He begins to ramp it up slowly but surely, but as he sprints by after person, he runs through multiple obstacles. We have giant robots, we have a giant ravine, and then a bunch of landmines. But Izuku would go sprinting in, but unfortunately something would happen with his Quirk. Maybe not specifically his Quirk, but all of the recovery time that he went through may have not been enough. He did something that he's never thought about doing before. He unleashed a power that he didn't know how to control. So what would that mean for his power? It may be, or may seem like he's okay on the outside, but on the inside, he truly isn't. Izuku goes sprinting out, and as he approaches the ravine past everybody else, he runs across the rope. But out of nowhere, the speed begins to fluctuate so much that his aura begins to ramp up as well. His normal stat multiplier begins to ramp like crazy, and his warrior mage class begins to work against him. He might have been able to copy some of these other quirks, but he hasn't trained them enough that he perfected them. And frankly, after using a technique that he had no idea how to use in terms of this reverse-like magic on the Nomu from before, It seems like his speed is now going haywire. He sprints right across the rope, tripping on a ledge, tumbling down into the ravine and holding on with one finger on top of the rope until unfortunately he slips. Plummeting down toward the bottom of the ravine, Izuku Midoriya tries to catch himself, plunging his arm into the wall as it honestly slightly breaks his hand, giving him a wrist fracture. He climbs his way back up as everybody else has now caught up to him. His body is still freaking out though as he slowly but surely makes his way to the mines. He looks at the mines and realizes something. He most likely cannot use his quirk at all right now. And if he does, it might go haywire again. He refuses to use any of his copycat quirks, at least for now. He'll only use his multiplier magic. But the only problem with that is, that might be wrong as well. If he uses that, it might go extremely bad. He walks over to the minefield, and he takes one step, and he realizes that he really has no control over his quirk at the moment. Shutting everything off, he has to get across this minefield without a quirk. And with everybody right next to him, everybody hot on his trail, with people like Melissa with One For All and Bakugo, Shoto Todoroki, and many others with outstanding quirks, will Izuku be able to cross this minefield safely? Izuku Midoriya tries to find out a way to get across. But one thing he does realize is that these mines are not, well, that lethal. He steps on one and realizes that it actually doesn't hurt him that much. So what if he enhances one? It might be a risk, but he might be able to catapult himself and then catapult everybody else backwards. He then digs up one of the mines as he begins to tamper with it. Melissa sees this and is completely confused as she's kind of trying to tread her way through the minefield herself. Izuku throws the mine forward as he runs and jumps straight on the mine as an aura bursts from it. He launches forward at insane speeds, but he kind of trips over his own feet, crashing down as he slides near the end of the race. Everybody else that is basically has the ability to just pass these mines right now and off the rip realizes that they'll give other people a chance to move, especially like Shoto Todoroki's ice, but they don't care. They need to catch up. Izuku crawls his way in and eventually would make it to the finish line, but he wouldn't cross until there's 3 other people hot on his trail: Melissa, Todoroki, and Katsuki Bakugo. But just as Izuku is about to crawl in, he sees that they're all using their quirks. He immediately activates Aizawa's copycat quirk, shutting them, all 3 of them, down instantaneously, only for half a second. He does this and he just pushes himself forward as they face plant at the finish line, and he crawls past, giving himself the number 1 seed. He was able to just squeak by and make it across in this obstacle course race, but how is he going to do in these future events? He doesn't even know what's up next. He gets up and he actually gets recovered just, to a certain extent, but he is slightly hurt. He has a messed up hand and also a messed up foot. So who would he have to go against? And what does he have to go against? What even is this event? After everyone finishes, Midnight would reveal probably the worst case scenario for Izuku. Instead of actually having a team event, she reveals that the 1 versus 1 event will now commence. There's a 1 versus 1 event, and the 1 seed will actually take on the very last seed. And in this case, it's a boy by the name of Shinso. Izuku looks up to see Shinso on the screen, and Midnight says they have 10 minutes to prepare. Izuku kind of sits down for a second and just gets time to rest and recover, and Melissa questions if he would be okay to actually fulfill beating him. And Izuku kind of shrugs. I don't know, maybe, but messed up hand, messed up foot, and my quirk is going crazy. Not a good look for me, to be honest with you. Izuku kind of laughs it off, but Bakugo tells him to win, and Izuku says he won't win on the accord of anybody else. He needs to win on his own accord, and if he sees that he can't win, he'll forfeit right now. It's really that simple for him. He doesn't really care that much. He's made his case, and everybody knows what he's capable of, and it's basically, he wouldn't go back and regret anything in terms of helping everybody and reversing the power that the Nomu had. So, and that's the main reason why his his quirk is going kind of haywire at the moment. Using something like that without knowing how to use it definitely messed him up. But nonetheless, he'll have to basically increase his mana stability and also his control, or his mana control in his stat sheet every time he levels from here on out, because that is definitely why everything is kind of going crazy. His body is overwhelmed at the fact that he has so much strength and power out of nowhere. It was all just one big rush, and it was the reverse of what he's been using. But after about 10 minutes, Izuku would walk up to the stage with a slight limp in his leg, and he knows exactly what quirk Shinso has. He's heard about what his quirk does, and it actually mind controls people. Izuku would stand there as the fight would begin, and Shinso would berate him, saying that a quirk like his seems to be perfect. All he has to do is a little bit of training, and that's it. Izuku disagrees with this, but he's not going to say a word. He just continues to walk towards Shinso. Shinso continues to talk, but more and more, Izuku just brushes it off. But the only problem is, Izuku, or it gets right under his skin when Shinso brings up Melissa. Izuku basically listens as he calls Melissa a crutch, that he's heard from the grapevine that she is practically useless and that he has to babysit her, and that he himself is falling behind because of it. And it's so obvious. Look at him. He's losing power by the minute. How can Izuku hang with the other heroes if he has to carry around dead weights? Izuku is getting more and more frustrated, and out of nowhere he appears in front of Shinso, and Izuku is about to punch him, but then stops. Izuku puts his hands in his pockets and just looks at Shinso. You know, you are something interesting. Your quirk is mind control, but it's something very, very good. But it's not going to work on me. Actually, won't work on me. It's not possible. Shinso is completely shocked. Izuku is not being fazed by his quirk at all. It seems like he has, well, the magic to keep it away from his ears, and there is no quirk effect being applied upon him. At least, quirks like this are extremely hard to get within Izuku's system, especially with Aizawa's quirk, or at least a copy of it and some substance of it combined within him. Izuku might be kind of at least outclassed in terms of not being able to use his quirk very much at the moment, but Shinso himself cannot use his quirk at all. Izuku stands there and gets ready for just a straight up fist fight, and he gives Shinso just that. But Izuku, with a messed up ankle and practically a fractured wrist, he falls behind in that fist fight relatively quick, but luckily, technique wise, he's able to keep up. He's able to just find any opening he possibly can, and the two boys are standing with their last grasp of breath, staring at each other, ready for round two. But instead of Izuku ramping it back up, at least that's what he begins to show to the crowd that he is going to, his aura calms down, disappears, and he raises one hand, and he says that he forfeits, telling Shinso that he has a ton of potential, and that this one-on-one stuff maybe would be a little bit easier for him if he knew how to actually fight in martial arts. Izuku says this, and Shinso begins to think, was he going easy on me? What is he even talking about? He begins to get mad, thinking Izuku is mocking him, but Izuku just limps away, saying that they'll talk later, that he doesn't have any intention of mocking Shinso, and that he'll be a great hero. He just needs to train a lot more, and frankly, they all do. Izuku sits down with his class, Bakugo, Melissa, and everybody else, Shota Todoroki, Momo Yaoyorozu, and frankly, Melissa is not mad at all. She's happy about what happened, but is kind of mad at the words that Shinso was saying, and she herself kind of questions if she is basically dragging Izuku down. He quickly denies that this would be the case at all, telling her that is a ridiculous statement, to not worry about it by any means, and to go win this thing. Izuku smiles as Bakugo scoffs, saying that he wanted to beat Izuku in the finals, but he'll beat whoever he has to win all of this. Izuku walks out, and all of their fights would commence. Fight after fight, everybody would lose back to back. But the 3 people that would end up being there and left for actually a 1 versus 1 versus 1 is Melissa Shields, Katsuki Bakugo, and Shoto Todoroki. The battle between the 3 top students in Class 1A would begin. Yes, of course, Izuku would be in the top 3 category, but of course, he's not currently, obviously, in the, tournament. Nonetheless, though, the last 3 are beginning to fight. Todoroki, Bakugo, and also Melissa continue to clash over and over again. But the problem is Shoto Todoroki refuses to use his fire side. And of course, Bakugo wants him to use his full strength, but he refuses nonetheless. Using his eyesight alone would get him eliminated first. Then it comes down to Melissa versus Bakugo. But unfortunately, Melissa doesn't have enough experience with One for All and would eventually be eliminated by Bakugo himself. But at the same time, Bakugo is not satisfied. He's extremely angry with the fact that he wasn't able to fight Izuku at his full power. Of course, he knows that it's not 100% his fault, but at the same time, Izuku did give up, quote unquote. He, in some weird way, wishes that he was able to defeat that Nomu so that there were no excuses and that a fight between him and Izuku could have gone down right then and there. But nonetheless, it didn't happen. The fight between them just didn't occur. But nonetheless, Bakugo would be deemed as the number 1, at least in the UA Sports Festival. Melissa at number 2, and number 3 would be Shoto Todoroki. Bakugo still would get muzzled and more or less be yelling and screaming, basically getting mad at Shoto and also Izuku, at the fact that he couldn't fight Izuku and that Shoto refused to use his full power. Nonetheless, this wouldn't hurt his stock, quote unquote, very much, because the next day when they arrived in class, Aizawa began to speak about what was going to happen next, and that involves internships. Everybody was offered basically various internships, and Izuku was still at one of the top on the list, arguably right behind Shoto Todoroki. Everybody knows his quirk and knows how powerful it is. They've heard of him, and obviously from his work with even support items, they know how good he is with that regard as well. And Melissa would be pretty highly recruited as well, but she would actually go with someone else by the name of Gran Torino. Maybe this would give her more of an outlook on training, and Izuku could go practically wherever he wanted, but he was curious. He didn't see Shoto do anything with his quirk, or at least in terms of his fire side. Why was that exactly? Was that a vendetta against his father, or was that just for personal reasons? Izuku was curious, and that curiosity would definitely get the best of him when he would see that Endeavor was on his list. Maybe he wanted to use Izuku just to power up Shoto, which would probably make a lot of sense, but at the same time, he had to take this opportunity. This is the number 2 hero in Japan, so why wouldn't you take the opportunity to go train with him? And of course, Izuku would do just that. Shoto not liking the idea, especially because he doesn't know Midoriya like that, but nonetheless he doesn't really have a choice in this instance. Bakugo would go with Best Jeanist just as normal, and they would say their farewells the next day. Izuku would tell Melissa and wish her good luck, saying that she should be able to get some proper training in, and when they come back they'll definitely train together very soon. Melissa's still on the bridge and on the fence of this idea that she's kind of dragging down Izuku, and maybe this would even confirm it. If Izuku goes out and trains with Endeavor, growing at tremendous rates, does that mean that he won't get stronger when training with her? Training with All Might? How would that even work? Nonetheless, she's trying not to think too much about it, but still, when you're in a universe or in a world where there is just powerful quirks and you weren't born with one, it would make you question everything around you. But with that said, Izuku and Todoroki would head off to Endeavor's agency, and when they arrived, Endeavor would make it extremely clear that he only cares about Todoroki. Izuku kind of laughs at this, and Endeavor gets mad and grabs him by the shirt. He scoffs at Izuku, telling him or asking him why is he laughing. I kind of assumed this to be the case, but nonetheless, I feel like this would be my best opportunity to get stronger. I mean, you are the number 2 hero, right? Endeavor lets go of Izuku, and Todoroki just pats him on the shoulder, and in a more friendly way than usual, and just tells him, more or less telling him that it's basically time to train. For the next couple days, that's literally what they do. Izuku would get a grip on various other, or his other techniques, and would actually learn more and more about that technique he used on the Nomu. He's a fast learner, don't get me wrong, by all means, but he is feeling some repercussions from basically being injured and all that. But after a couple days of training, all of that stuff is ironed out, and he doesn't feel basically overworked by any means anymore. But after those couple days, Endeavor would then bring up something for all of them to do, and that is actually going out and hunting down the hero killer himself. The hero killer is someone that is currently in Hosu by the reports that Endeavor has heard, and the hero killer has not been touched in a long time. Nobody has even been able to capture him, defeating the likes of Ingenium and various other strong heroes. The hero killer is relatively unknown. They don't know much about him. They just know him as the hero killer. Of course, those patrols would eventually begin. They would head out toward Hosu City, but just as they head out, they see Nomus and monsters all around. Endeavor would make it extremely clear that they would need help evacuating everybody else and to be safe. So that's exactly what they would end up doing, moving people around and helping anybody they possibly can out. But that's until Izuku gets an odd, very well decrypted text. It's just a location from Melissa. Why would she be sending that? Showing this to Todoroki, Todoroki is confused as well, but he tells Izuku that he should scout all around the area and he'll go exactly to the location. Izuku, activating his quirk and also his speed quirk, accelerates around, dashing back and forth up and down certain streets. Eventually, they both converge on an alleyway, and obviously Todoroki would tell Endeavor to send reinforcements their way, because there's an assumption to be made that there's the hero killer will be waiting for them. And when they arrive, that is exactly the case. Melissa and Tenya Ida, their classmate, are currently on the ground, completely paralyzed. The hero killer has a sword right above Ida's neck, and right before he can finish him off, a blast of flames comes sending right toward the hero killer. Izuku is shocked, and Todoroki looks at Izuku and just basically in a look of, don't question it, at least not right now. He dashes toward the hero killer, or Izuku dashes toward the hero killer, landing a clean blow right to the chest of Stain. Stain getting sent backwards but recovering relatively quick. Izuku grabs Melissa and Tenya Ida and drags them off toward or a further part away from the alley. Immediately he stands in front of the hero killer again, but the hero killer's movement speed seems like it's too much. He's going to have to limit the movement of the hero killer himself. Izuku has to come up with something. Wait, he has an idea. Limiting movement should be perfect. He's a warrior mage for a reason. Mages are known for their long-range combat, spells, magic, stuff like that. But a warrior mage is different. They relish in the hand-to-hand combat. Izuku loves hand-to-hand combat. Even without his quirk, he was extremely into it. He loved the feel of being able to use your hands. It was basically poetry in motion. Izuku stood his ground, putting his right foot forward and his left foot backwards, tilted to the side, and he put out his hand. As he does, his aura begins to stem to his hand alone. Breaching out of his knuckles seems to be this odd-looking rope-like aura, seemingly making a cage around Izuku and the hero killer. The cage is not too big, maybe 5 yards by 10 yards. It's a pretty decently small cage, but when the sides are touched, the hero killer would be electrocuted. Izuku would just phase right through the bars as if it were nothing, but that took a tremendous amount of control. Izuku waved toward Todoroki to basically get the other two out of there, and that he will contain the hero killer for as long as possible. Shoto thinks this is a bad idea. One-on-one with a villain like him isn't the best choice, but Shoto's going to trust him. He grabs the other two, getting them to safety, and tries to get his father and other reinforcements to hurry up. But Izuku, in the meantime, is going to have hell in a cage with the hero killer himself. Izuku would go blow for blow with the hero killer, but limiting his movement was probably the best choice he could have had. Still, he would land blow after blow, but the hero killer would get multiple cuts on Izuku that he would try his best to nullify his own blood, trying to make it evaporate instantaneously while he fights, but one piece of blood, one little speck, would be licked, paralyzing him immediately. The bars seemingly drop, and the cage is gone now. He no longer has full control over it. At least that's what the hero killer thinks. The hero killer walks up and commends him, saying that it seems like he was on the path of being a real hero, but frankly, he shouldn't have let his friends just run away like that. That probably wasn't the best choice. The hero killer gets ready to plunge his sword into Izuku's chest, but just as he does, the cage reappears and separates him and Izuku. But at the same time, it's like two coffins. Izuku is in one chamber with no windows, no bars, no nothing. It's just seemingly like brick. Izuku sticks them both there and says that he'll hold this for as long as he has to. The hero killer keeps slamming his sword into this material that's in front of him, but Izuku refuses to let it go. It begins to crack and it begins to tremble, but he tries to hold it as long as possible. But you have to realize, when you're under this paralyzed state, it's extremely hard to even focus. Izuku is shaken massively. This is not something he's used to doing. A cage, basically for offensive capabilities, is one thing. This feels like a stall tactic. This feels like, well, a defensive tactic. He's never really tried to do something like this before, but he holds his grip as hard as possible. But just as the basically reinforcement right in front of him breaks off, the hero killer has the blade to Izuku's neck. But luckily, the flames from Endeavor and also Shota Todoroki meet the hero killer front force, or with a blunt force, and slam him back to the wall, knocking him out. Izuku sighs and kind of starts laughing. Endeavor questions why the little kid or the idiot in front of him is laughing, but Izuku doesn't say a word and is already passed out, completely out cold from exhaustion. Izuku just stalled one of the strongest villains, at least one of the strongest villains that are out there currently that the society knows of, on his own. He was able to maintain the hero killer without fighting too much. He knew that fighting a brawl with the hero killer would have been a death sentence. So this ended up being just a stale match or a stall match. That's all he wanted to do, and he got what he wanted. He would wake up in a hospital days later, and he'd be confronted by this dog-looking person. It seems like it's the police captain, and the police captain says that he actually should be in trouble, that they should be basically doing something to punish him because he didn't use this quirk in public without a license. And obviously the others there would try to argue it, but Izuku just waves them off, saying that it's fine, he made his choice. But this police captain, that's basically a dog, tells him that he didn't see anything. Endeavor defeated the hero killer, and that's what the story is going to be sent out to the public. Izuku slightly smiles and thanks him as he tries to get up, but realizes that he has 3 cracked ribs. Izuku looks down and just sighs, realizing that he got hurt again. He really needs to get better at that. It seems like there is no universe that Izuku isn't getting hurt. Nonetheless though, Izuku thanks him and says that he'll have a nice fun time recovering from the battle wounds that the hero killer gave him, and goddamn were those blades sharp. After some recovery time, Izuku would arrive back in class, but when he did, it seemed that they were having a written final exam. Everybody felt kind of bad for Izuku, thinking that he was going to just fail, except for the people that actually knew him. Bakugo hates to admit it, but Izuku is extremely smart, and he'll be fine, just fine, probably will pass higher than most of these other idiots, and Melissa herself knows how smart Izuku is. But this wouldn't be the main obstacle for any of them. For Izuku, the main obstacle would be the following day. Of course, they have a forest training camp coming up, but the only way to go to that is passing their exams. And now it's time for their practical exam. What they thought to be against robots, well, it's a little different. It's no longer going to be against robots, it's going to be against the teachers. And frankly, Izuku has one of the hardest people to face. Scratch that. Izuku, Bakugo, and Melissa have one person to take on, and his name is All Might, the symbol of peace, and the #1 hero comes crashing down from the sky right in front of their gym, saying that he will be their opponent and that their final test is him. All Might, the #1 pro hero in Japan. Obviously, their fight will begin after a couple other matches with the other students, but it will be a 3 versus 1. You would think it would be pretty, well, on the side of the other heroes, or more specifically, the hero students. But Izuku Midoriya, Katsuki Bakugo, and Melissa Shields will definitely be in for one hell of a fight. This is All Might we're talking about. He may be weaker at this moment, but still, his power is going to exceed far more than what they may be capable of. All 3 of them, including All Might, are sent off into a small city, and their fight is about to begin. The goal is to either go past the gate, all 3 of them basically escape, or cuff All Might, defeating him in battle. Izuku, Bakugo, and also Melissa stand there and consider making a small plan, at least the course of action they believe to bring. But Bakugo says that he'll take front charge, and just as they're allowed to go, Bakugo goes storming off at insane speeds. Melissa looks at Izuku, and they both kind of shrug, following suit as they follow Bakugo into battle. Of course, Bakugo wants to fight All Might. Izuku doesn't think this is the best idea, but frankly, with Bakugo just storming into the fight, he's not going to let him go on his own. Bakugo blasts toward All Might and even lands a clean explosion on him before All Might can even react to throw his own punch. But the blast did practically nothing. But just as he thinks that he can counterattack, Melissa pushes Bakugo out of the way, and Izuku gets right behind All Might, using 10 times his strength and using the aura that he's basically almost mastered at this point. He grabs All Might from behind and suplexes him on his back. Melissa follows up by kicking All Might in the face using 10% of One For All. Immediately, Izuku follows up and tries to throw All Might out of building, but his arm is grabbed and he gets flipped on his back himself and slammed on the ground. Bakugo sees this as basically a chance to capitalize, and he blasts All Might in the face as Melissa follows up with a flurry of punches. All Might begins to get overwhelmed slowly but surely by the speed of not only these future heroes, but also the kind of reckless coordination they're going by at the moment. Nonetheless, though, All Might gathers his footing and basically blasts them all away. Izuku is able to regain exactly what he wants to do and begins to dash forward at All Might at insane speeds. It seems like he's running faster than the eye can even keep up with. Izuku is dashing from one point to another, just distracting All Might. This allows for the rest of his team to gather distance and get right in front of All Might for basically a team attack. Bakugo lines up a condensed blast from his hands. As it blasts towards All Might though, Melissa follows up and grabs All Might from behind, making sure that he can't move. Izuku would follow up and immediately kick All Might's head back toward the ground as the blast would land right on All Might's side. Without them knowing anything, frankly, at all, it seems like they just hurt All Might extremely bad. This allows them to cuff All Might, but they're confused as how that one attack that shouldn't have put him out did way more damage than it should have. They begin to help All Might up and actually help him to recovery girls, but All Might explains exactly what happened, that there is a wound that he has exactly where they hit him. They apologize, but he says that it's not like they knew, and even if they did, the best choice of action would be to focus on the weakness of the opponent. They obviously feel bad though. They didn't mean to actually hurt him that badly. They didn't think they would be able to. But nonetheless, they show their success and they're obviously allowed and pass the final exam. But eventually it would be obviously revealed that Aizawa would have let everybody go no matter what. But there will be some extra classes for those people that didn't pass normally. After some time would pass, their next mission would be at the forest training camp. They would head over on the bus and eventually stop at a nearby cliff, an overhang that looked extremely nice. Izuku was watching out and looking around, and he realized there must be a reason why they're here, in which that reason would eventually come up. The Wild Pussycats would show themselves and begin speaking with everybody. They introduce each other and so on and so forth, eventually leading to, well, the Class 1B bus going right by them. They begin to get concerned, and let's just say the mountain begins to change very rapidly, and they all get tossed off in an instant. A new training is about to begin. Izuku and his entire class, Class 1A, is going to have to fight through monsters throughout the entirety of the forest. Luckily, with powerhouses like Bakugo, Izuku, and Melissa, and various others in Class 1A, this shouldn't be too much trouble. They blast through the monsters with relative ease, and Izuku tries out various techniques that he's not 100% sure on using at this moment. He begins using his reverse-like ability. His reverse-like ability is more of a distance and range attack. He tried to use this against the Nomu, and even saw some success with Kurogiri, which is something definitely to think about in the future. But nonetheless, he uses these reverse attacks to basically degrade these monsters instantaneously, and he's not even using it at a really high level. Being able to blast these monsters into practical dust and just leave them as rubble entirely is extremely beneficial for him, at least, and they just make their way through the forest at a pretty fast rate. When they arrive, the teachers and also the Wild Pussycats are pretty impressed about how fast they got through. Obviously, Izuku being a main factor of that, but nonetheless, they did all get through together, and they'll be able to eat some dinner, get cleaned up, and all that good stuff. Izuku would see a little kid, and his name is actually Koda. He would walk over toward Koda and basically introduce himself, about to ask Koda about what he's doing there and basically who he is exactly. But as Izuku is about to ask this, he gets punched in the nuts. Well, unfortunate for Izuku because this really hurt, and Izuku is going to be basically walking with a limp for the rest of the day. He would eventually have dinner with Melissa, Bakugo, and all of them, all of his classmates, and eventually they'd head to bed. But that next morning, the true training would finally begin, and Aizawa would go over everything that he wants individual students to work on. Melissa is going to start sparring with some of the people that are there, and Izuku personally needs to work on his reverse type of warrior mage magic. Aizawa has no idea how that even works, but that magic, but also Aizawa's little Quirk copy thing that he has are two crucial things that he feels if he gets a grip on would be extremely beneficial for all of them. Izuku agrees on this and begins to work on this reverse warrior magic that he's come up with. It's not a multiplier on his strength anymore, it seems to be a multiplier or a reverse multiplier on everybody else's, meaning that he might be able to get rid of quirks using this technique, but without extreme control over it, he actually has to be relatively close. And he saw what happened when he wasn't exactly close to the enemy. He had to use an intense amount of power around it, and when he used it, the Nomu may have been defeated and basically stripped of all the quirks, but when he did, it basically destroyed him, knocked him out for multiple days, and it frankly just destroyed his body entirely. But now that he can slowly but surely learn how to use it more and more, this will definitely become beneficial. He continues to do this over and over and over again, trying to maintain this at a regular rate, as if it became a natural state of his body. Throughout the entire day, he'd do this and he'd exhaust himself so much. He'd continue more and more until finally night would come. When night would come, they'd have dinner, eat dinner, relax, and do all the normal stuff they would end up doing, and they would repeat the same process the next day. But just when they were going to have a little bit of fun, they were going to have some downtime and have a little bit of kind of like a hide and seek or a test of strength in the forest, everything seemed to be odd. Izuku began to sense something. He began to feel something odd, and all he saw in his quest log was round 2. He didn't know what it meant, but quickly he would realize something. Koda's not there. Koda's actually somewhere else. He saw him walk away earlier. He tells Melissa that he's going to run after him, and that's what he does. He jumps over there and actually brings him food initially just to make sure that he's calm and safe, but Izuku knows that something's amiss. He gives him the food, and Izuku begins talking to him, saying that they need to go back to the camp. But Koda refuses, saying that he sounds ridiculous, but Izuku doesn't want to alarm him. That's until a deep, terrifying voice begins to speak to them, telling Izuku that it would have been best if he just grabbed the boy and ran, but now they're both gonna die on this hill. Izuku turns and tells Koda to get behind him, that he can handle this, that there's nothing to worry about. Muscular disagrees though, saying that there is a lot to worry about. Muscular charges in at Izuku, but Izuku is able to slide under his legs and trip him up a little bit. He tells Koda to run down the hill, and luckily Koda obliges. But he doesn't fully run down, he just goes down enough to hide. He wants to make sure that Izuku doesn't die in this fit, and if he does, he needs to know what actually happened. So Koda hides while Muscular and Izuku begin their all-out brawl. They begin to go back and forth, and Muscular says that it's honestly pretty beneficial that he found him first, because, well, they've been looking for him. Well, also Katsuki Bakugo, but this will work out as well. Izuku ignores the comments that Muscular's making and lands a blow straight to his chest. Not doing that much damage, but he ramps up his strength multiplier all the way up to 15 times, obliterating part of his chest, and he picks up Muscular and slams him to the ground. Muscular, kind of staggered, he reverses the strength all the way back into his, well, what he's been working on, that warrior mage like reverse magic, and he begins to grab Muscular by the shoulders. His strength begins to get stripped away from him, and Muscular begins to panic, kicking Izuku off of him, but Izuku has already sapped him of so much strength. Muscular is far weaker now than he would be, well, any time before. Muscular tries to pull out anything he possibly can, but realizes that this fight is already over. That he may have fallen too far behind in whatever he did, whatever the kid figured out, he's far more progressed than they possibly would have imagined. Izuku would land a clean blow using a kick to the back of his head, and eventually would knock out Muscular as he begins to pant, gasping for air. Izuku is extremely tired. He's been training this technique all day long, and the entirety of yesterday as well, and having to fight someone that strong right after he did all that training, let's just say it wasn't the most beneficial thing for his current cardiovascular health. Yes, maybe in the long run, he'll feel pretty good in his stamina, but right now, he's extremely tired. Nonetheless, though, he begins to walk down the area after he basically captures Muscular in a certain area to basically keep him there for a while. He sees Koda and he picks him up, telling him that he should have really ran away, but nonetheless, Izuku begins to take off. He runs into Aizawa and he gives Aizawa Koda. Eventually, they would head off, but somehow they would part away. Izuku would try and help other people, basically after being separated from Aizawa, but after some time would pass, Izuku would end up getting captured. He would get put in a small little marble-like gumball, and it seems like Bakugo Katsuki had the same treatment. Melissa herself tried to save him as both of them would appear as he'd watch himself and Bakugo go through a portal. Eventually, they'd wake up strapped to 2 chairs, and Bakugo would be the only one treated with decency, because they know Izuku is no villain. Izuku just has extreme power that they want. They tell Bakugo he obviously doesn't like this Izuku guy, so how about he joins them, and then he can maybe have his power. Bakugo hears this and looks at Izuku and tells them to untie him, to basically get him out of the shackles that they have him in, and of course they oblige. But just as they think Bakugo might have taken the bait, Bakugo looks toward Izuku, blasting off his cuffs, and immediately the tandem are free. Bakugo regards Izuku, saying that he would never have taken some dumbass shortcut like that, and he's ready for a fight. Izuku agrees, and he's ready for a fight as well. The other villains say that there is no getting out of this scenario, that the heroes haven't found them for the last 12 to 18 hours. You think they're gonna find them now? Just as they're saying this though, there's a knock on the door. The knock on the door says that they're here for pizza. But it's not pizza, it's the pro heroes. The pro heroes have finally arrived, and when that door gets punched open, it's Edge Shot. And various other heroes are there as well. Gran Torino, All Might himself, and various others are bombarding the villains. Izuku and Bakugo are somehow able to get out, but just as they escape the building, this goo begins to surround them both, and they're teleported to the center of the city. They look up and they can feel the pressure alone coming from one man, from one person. All for One. All for One himself is standing in front of them, putting his arms out wide, telling them that it's now over, that they will work for him or die. Just as they say that, or he says this though, All Might lands a clean punch on All for One's face, sending him toward a mountain. He tells Bakugo and Izuku nod toward each other and make a break for it, trying to leave, but the League of Villains are hot on their trail and surround them both. Izuku realizes that there's only really one way out, and he has an idea, but it's going to be a risk. He tells Bakugo that he doesn't really understand Bakugo's quirk to a fullest extent. How hard does he focus in terms of making his explosions? Bakugo explains that it's second nature. If he wants the pure explosions to actually happen, he needs to feel the same way, like it's his quirk. You need to think of it as if it was an actual quirk and not some magical spell that you copied it with. Izuku, hearing this, realizes why he's had so much struggle with not only his speed enhancement quirk, Aizawa's quirk, and also his Bakugo's, is because he'd been taking it as if, well, it's just magic, a magic copy. No, it's not just a copy, it's a carbon copy. It's a perfect copy. Izuku, realizing this now, grabs Bakugo by the shoulder and tells him that they need to use their explosions at the same time. They can launch out of here instantly, and they should be able to leave. And obviously Bakugo is all for it. Immediately, Izuku grabs him by the wrist and tells him to go right now. They both explode at the same time, and it sends them so high into the air that you practically can't see them at all. Izuku then grabs onto Bakugo's shoulder as Bakugo himself decides to take the lead and blast them the rest of the way out of there. Luckily, they were able to escape, but let's just say they were pretty high up, so they come crashing down onto a building pretty hard, and it's extremely hard to slow down when he's trying to carry Izuku as well. They land on a building though right by a giant screen. The giant screen is currently playing, and they're watching as All Might and All for One are going at it. Izuku wishes that they were still there, maybe somehow to help, but frankly, it doesn't look like it's even the case. It doesn't even look like it's possible. But to be fair, just as long as All Might can keep up with All for One, the other heroes might be able to support in some way possible. A lot of time would pass, and the fight would conclude with All Might himself being out of his big form and pointing toward the camera. The defeat of All for One was inevitable. He points toward the camera saying that you are next. Many of these people don't understand what he meant. Maybe he was talking about future heroes, maybe he was talking about the villains that think that they can still fight. But no, that's not who they were talking, or who he was talking about. He was talking about, well, Melissa, Izuku, Bakugo, and far many others that are ready to fight and take front center stage and become the new symbol of pieces. I don't know. Maybe they'll be able to do it, maybe they won't. But nonetheless, the fall of All Might, or at least the end of All Might, is something that everybody will mourn for a while. He may not be dead, but his power seems to be gone entirely. So when all of them go back to school, they realize how much that actually would affect everybody. All Might would still be there though. helping people out, helping people train the best he possibly can. This would lead them into training, making super moves, doing anything they possibly can. Izuku would finally learn how to actually use the quirks that he copied, carbon copied. Now they're part of him. They're not just someone else's powers, they're actually his powers now. He learns how to combo them up with each other, but more specifically using his reverse warrior mage mana or energy in combination of Aizawa's quirk. After some time of training, something would get revealed. Their provisional hero licensing exam would be right on the way. Something that all of them would be excited for, because it would be a chance for all of them to become true heroes. Melissa and Izuku would speak about what they would do and where they would go for agencies if they got their provisional hero licensing exam or their license. And obviously Bakugo would barge in slightly, saying that if they're saying ifs, they won't be getting it. Obviously he's just being a Bakugo, and he walks away as Melissa and Izuku kind of laugh at the reaction they got from him. Of course, they don't take him as seriously. I mean, why would you? He's basically a Pomeranian. But nonetheless, they're ready for this next step. And when they head over to the provisional hero licensing exam, everyone seems buddy-buddy. But they know that they have a large target on their back, and when the first event would start, that would become extremely prevalent. Izuku Midoriya and Class 1A have arrived at the provisional hero licensing exam. When they do arrive, they begin to see that a ton of people are staring at them, acting friendly. But quickly they pick up on the idea that they are not so friendly. Obviously, they want something from them, and obviously, it would all come down to making sure that they target Class 1A. During the first event, that is exactly what happens. The idea is to basically tag different people with their odd, little dodgeballs, you could say. And during this sequence, Class 1A would be targeted heavily. But the only problem is, they miscalculated on some of the people that were there, not knowing exactly what quirks they all had. They thought Izuku's quirk was extremely limited, extremely speed-based, but Izuku didn't show much during the sports festival, and he would show all of them quickly that it was a large miscalculation to take him lightly and also his class. The development of his class was far beyond what most people would even think, and let's just say a lot of people would drop almost instantaneously. Izuku, Melissa, and Bakugo would almost pass off the rip because all of the people would just come soaring to them. Izuku would basically head off into the waiting room, hoping that the rest of his class would follow suit. But we'll have to find out what happens in the next event, and let's say the more serious event known as the rescue event version of the provisional hero licensing exam, right in this episode. He begins to wait for the rest of his class to finish up, watching in the monitors to see how his class is currently doing. Eventually seeing that a bunch of them would slowly but surely pass. Aizawa would be watching this and, as expected, isn't surprised of how developed his students are. Yes, there are a bunch of first-year students, but nonetheless, they're extremely impressive. After a ton of struggle, you could say, finally the event is completely finished, and now it's time for the next event, known as the rescue portion of the event. You're going to have to basically save people and help anybody out as best as possible, and basically this is perfect for Izuku. At the end of the day, Izuku has a ton of tangible things that he can use. He's basically has a ton of attributes that he can use as well, and that's exactly what he's going to be doing. He's going to be using a ton of these attributes to his advantage. In terms of basically helping set up a giant campsite, he can easily, or like a recovery site, he can easily do that with Momo Yaoyorozu. Doing that would get him extra points right off the bat. On top of that, he's extremely smart in terms of rescue training. His intelligence has been off the charts recently, especially with how much he's been learning and how much his stats are affected by his learning. So every little aspect of it, he knows the ins and outs of making sure that they have safe evacuation and all of the above. On top of that, we all know his physical strength, all know how strong he could be, and that would be blatantly shown right when, a ton of villains would come. Sirens begin to blare, and Gang Orca and a ton of villains behind him begin to soar in. Immediately, Izuku begins to kind of tell everybody that they have to get everybody out of there first and allow the two heavy hitters for now to fend off on their own. Todoroki and also Inasa would hold the lines for now. Izuku would then start slowly walking and heading over to the battlefield with Melissa as well, and their fight would truly begin. Izuku immediately just head-to-head conflicts with Gang Orca, making a small bubble around both of them. He tells Inasa and Todoroki to step it up and actually work together. Just as he does this though, flames and the wind begin to clash with each other, and it begins to make some sort of vortex. A vortex around both Izuku and Gang Orca, and it begins to strip Gang Orca of his water slowly but surely. Izuku refusing to allow the bubble to dissipate, he traps Gang Orca inside this odd bubble alone, forcing him to stay exactly where he is. Izuku holds him still while this vortex swarms him. Gang Orca tries to get the water, basically this water, and rehydrate himself, but in that bubble, Izuku would immediately attack this water jug and get rid of any water he can possibly use, and this basically puts Gang Orca out of commission all the way until the sirens go off and the speaker comes back on saying that the exam is now officially over. Izuku is happy to see this, and frankly, everybody kind of got off scotch easy. Melissa didn't even have to do much. That little technique was basically just a plan number one. Frankly, Izuku had full expectations that Gang Orca would break out, and then him and Melissa would basically take up on the hand-to-hand combat side of things. But luckily, it didn't even come to that. And everything worked out for the best. So everybody begins to head out and wait on their results. Eventually, those results would roll in, and Izuku, Melissa, and many others would pass. Unfortunately, Bakugo, Todoroki, and Inasa wouldn't because of their earlier conflicts. Of course, Bakugo being Bakugo, he probably lashed out at some fake civilian, and obviously Inasa and Todoroki were having their little debacle. But nonetheless, Izuku got what he wanted, and Melissa did as well, and now they're ready to finally start work studies. And this would basically be explained by the one and only Big Three. Mirio, Nejire, and Tamaki would explain it to everybody, but it would end up just being a Mirio wants to fight everybody type of deal. Eventually, this fight would lead to Izuku, Melissa, and basically anybody else trying to fend off Mirio, but frankly, Mirio's style of fighting maybe not as strong as Izuku in pure power, but flat out is unpredictable, at least at that moment. Izuku had a ton of struggle and trouble trying to fight him, but maybe if they tried to fight in the future, Izuku would have the upper hand. Maybe there's some sort of way for him to slow down Mirio, but at this moment, Izuku doesn't have an answer for that, but luckily he's not going to have to fight Mirio in some sort of villain battle, so that's nothing to worry about. After some time would pass, All Might himself would actually approach Izuku and Melissa, asking if they would both, go and try to join a work study of someone he knows very well by the name of Sir Night-Eye, in which both of them are excited at the idea. But of course it won't be that simple. Of course, Night-Eye would make it extremely hard on them, and Mirio would kind of tell them this as well. And he brings up the idea that maybe he should just have both of them fight and then go down to that. But Izuku would disagree with this idea, saying that he could just go to a different work study. It doesn't matter that much to him. He just wants to work with somebody that is extremely close to All Might himself. And if that's that big of a problem, and if he feels that adding two more sidekicks is that big of a trouble, he could just go take up on somebody else's offer. Obviously, Izuku would have a ton of offers. Melissa would have a good amount as well, but Izuku is known now to be extremely powerful and extremely impressive. They also know him from his past as well, so there's a ton of work studies out there, but just as he says this, Sir Night-Eye accepts them both. He kind of slightly gives us a weird smirk and tells them that That's kind of the answer that he wanted. He expected the answer to be an unselfish one. Izuku willing to give up the spotlight to someone else and not getting overheaded by, some other outside source. Just because he's big and popular, or at least somewhat popular compared to everybody else, doesn't mean that he gets a free ride and a full gimme no matter what, even with Night Eye himself. Izuku was kind of shocked to hear this and didn't even think about it that way. Didn't even think about it in a way of maybe he should just be as humble as possible. This is just Izuku in general. He's never been the cocky type, and he always wants to put people in the situation or a better situation to basically rise to their own occasion. But with that said, everything would kind of get split. Mirio would go with Melissa, and Izuku would actually go on patrols with Bubble Girl. Everything would kind of be separated away from each other, and they're a little bit disappointed because Izuku would like to go on patrols with Melissa, and their chemistry is pretty good in terms of their fighting. But obviously Night Eye brings up the fact that, of course, their chemistry might be good, but he does need to get good chemistry with other people. Same thing with Mirio. So, of course, they're going to be switching off and on, and Izuku and Mirio would be working together at some point. But that some point would actually not eventually come, because on one of the first patrols that Mirio and Melissa go on, they come across a young girl by the name of Eri. Izuku, not knowing anything about this, not knowing about anything that's happening, would eventually get called in after Bubble Girls and his patrol, and it was kind of a stale patrol. Nothing really happened, but he got some good insight at what it means to be a sidekick for someone like Sir Night Eye. When they arrive back, they're immediately informed of what's going on, and that a meeting will ensue very soon. And when that meeting occurs, a ton of other heroes would join as well. It's actually Overhaul. Someone they've been searching for a long time. The leader of the Shie Hassaikai has now been found. Now they need to put their own best foot forward to try and find this person, locate their location, and execute exactly what they need to do. And that is what's going to happen in the next couple days. After those couple days pass, they wake up early in the morning and they all meet up ready for a fight. They all are outside of the supposed Shie Hassaikai base, and the invasion of that place would then begin. But while they're waiting for basically the police officer to read them their rights, Izuku realizes that Melissa seems kind of out of it. He asks if she's okay, and of course she kind of blows this off, saying that she's completely fine, but Izuku knows. He tells her that they're going to get that little girl now. They're going to save her now. So whatever happened back then, it doesn't matter. That they'll figure it out and they're going to save her and everybody's going to be safe. Izuku confidently says this and gets ready himself as his aura begins to flare up slightly, and he's basically ready for an actual fight. This will be his first villain encounter. Well, actual villain encounter that's legal technically. But once those rights are read off, a giant monster-like person begins charging out of the area. Luckily, Izuku and a bunch of others can get through that area, and they would try their best to find Overhaul himself. And off the rip, Mirio says that he'll go ahead and try to find Overhaul, and Izuku would try his best to actually keep up with Mirio with Melissa as well. After a long time would pass, they'd eventually spot Overhaul in a hallway. Coming across Overhaul, Izuku would tell them that they need to do a proper plan. If they can capture Overhaul and keep him in stasis, everything will go smoothly. So Mirio, immediately dashing toward Overhaul, pins him to the ground and throws him into a different room, crashing through another wall. Izuku would try to set up the same thing he did to Gang Orca. Trap him in this energy bubble and not allow him to leave. Izuku trapping both him and Overhaul in that bubble and eventually getting out. He's holding him still and not allowing Overhaul to move at all. He tries his best to puncture the energy bubble with spikes, ground spikes, anything he can possibly think of, but he can't even get anything to happen. Nothing is working. And of course, Izuku makes sure that he constricts the bubble as much as possible, using his mana and his magic that are extremely progressed by this point. Izuku is able to keep Overhaul exactly where he is. Mirio and Melissa would approach the bubble, getting ready to finish the job, knock him out, and then they'll take him out relatively easily with some cuffs. But just as they're about to do this, a bullet goes flying toward Mirio. About to connect with Mirio, he phases through the bullets. But as he does this, he looks to his left to see Melissa right in the way. Izuku, seeing the bullets, he has to make a decision. Does he let go of the bubble? Does he let Melissa get hit and keep the bubble up? What's going to happen? He's heard rumors though that this bullet could mean dequarking somebody, could get rid of their quirk entirely. Is he going to take that chance? So he decides to do neither. He's not going to let Melissa get hit, and he's not going to let go of the bubble. Using a magic technique that he now knows as a warrior mage, he switches places with Melissa. Holding onto the bubble during this process, he touches the bubble as well, gripping onto it, as basically that was his point of teleportation, close enough to Melissa that he can transfer energy back and forth, teleporting her away from the bubble as the bullet lands right in his shoulder. Mirio takes the opportunity to immediately cuff Overhaul, and luckily was able to get out of the situation, or at least in terms of Overhaul's powers, and Melissa knocks out the guy that just shot the bullets, but Izuku realizes that the bubble begins to fade. And all his powers begin to go. He looks at his arm and nothing is showing up. He can't activate his HUD menu. Nothing is working. Izuku seems to be gone. His quirk is gone. He doesn't know what's happening. He feels strong to a certain extent, but there is no HUD menu. There is no alteration that he can feel. He tries to activate any mana or any energy he possibly could. Nothing is working. But it's odd. He walks up to the nearby wall and he punches it, and it feels like he's still pretty strong, but he doesn't. Maybe it has something to do with just having those passive bonuses already, and those never go away, making it so Izuku is quirkless. There's a lot of things that went through his head during this decision, so fast in fact that he was able to figure it out while a bullet was traveling through the air. But nonetheless, he wasn't going to let Melissa become quirkless again, and he knows how important One for All is, and he didn't want that just being erased, poofed off into existence. But nonetheless, it was a decision he'll have to live with now. They take Overhaul away, capture him, and capture all the villains, and eventually they take Eri to the hospital. Izuku would be in the hospital as well, but his injuries weren't insane. Of course, he has a bit of a bullet wound, but other than that, it was nothing too impactful, well, except for losing his quirk. And obviously, Eri would know about this. Eri would know that his quirk would be lost because she knows what that bullet does. Eri is extremely sad, especially after seeing a young hero save another person from getting their quirk erased. And Izuku doesn't feel bad about this at all. He thinks that it's just something that happens in the line of work. He's always been this way. He's always thought this way. He's not going to lose his mind over the idea that he got shot by a quirk erasing bullet. He still has his intelligence. He still has a lot to work with. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to try and do something else. Aizawa, though, would make it abundantly clear that he didn't want Izuku leaving Class 1A. He's still a hero, nonetheless, and he can do far more than what most can possibly believe. During the Class 1A versus Class 1B training session, Izuku would have a different job. He would actually be just someone for Class 1A to run by different plans with. Izuku is extremely good at making plans, as we've seen throughout the entire series, so that's what he would help them with. Eventually, they'd basically get almost every single win, and Class 1A would do a complete sweep through. It would be relatively easily. And Melissa would just straight up take the place of Izuku. Of course, they'd have their little bit of struggles, but Izuku's planning was practically flawless, and it was extremely easy for Class 1A to overwhelm them. This was kind of proof to Izuku, and obviously what Aizawa was trying to show him, that he's more than just his powers, more than just basically what he thought he was. Izuku is strong even without his quirk. He doesn't need to be on the battlefield to make, well, an impact. Izuku hearing this did make him feel a lot better, but at the end of the day, he would always want his quirk back. But eventually he would be given that opportunity. Aizawa tells him that if he wants his quirk back, that he needs to train somebody. And he's pretty good at that already, and Aizawa was his teacher, or is his teacher, and he's sure that he's learned a couple things from their training sessions, but it's time for him to train someone else. Izuku would enter the room and would see Eri. Eri is the person that Izuku's basically going to have to train, and once he's successful with that, then he would have quote-unquote earned his quirk back. Once he makes Eri into a proper hero, Izuku can be alongside her and all of his friends, Melissa, Bakugo, anybody else, and they can all be heroes together. But for now, and for a little while, Izuku will be quirkless, or at least known to be quirkless. How much will this affect him over time? Maybe a little bit, but once he gets his quirk back, his dreams of being on the front lines with Melissa and various other heroes that he looks up to will continue on. But that is a story for another day. And this is the end of What If Deku had an RPG leveling quirk.
I don't wanna waste what's